I have an important, life and death job to take care of." Those were Edward's parting words before he left for a business trip, leaving me and our 1-month-old daughter behind. I had felt something was off about Edward lately, but I couldn't bring myself to say anything, even though the suspicion of an affair kept creeping into my mind. But that day, I finally decided to face the truth. I headed to the airport, determined to confront him. Then I overheard a conversation that was beyond belief. "She is a real fool, isn't she? Now we can enjoy ourselves, just the two of us." At the moment I saw Edward laughing with his ex-girlfriend Angela, something inside me shattered completely. Their light-hearted, mocking laughter made my suppressed anger rise to the surface all at once. It felt like every bit of patience I'd had was finally paying off. At that moment, this hellish flight was just about to begin. My name is Cynthia, and I'm 28 years old. I work as a flight attendant, and although it keeps me busy, I love spending time in the sky. My husband Edward and I met back in high school, and we've been together for 10 years now. Back then, we were so close. It just felt natural to be together. And we never fought. "Cynthia, one day, let's get married." I still remember his words clearly, even now, imagining a future together. Every moment was so joyful for us. When we get married at 25, people around us would say, "You two make such a great couple." But things began to change gradually after marriage. I think our inability to have a child right away was one of the reasons we started growing apart. "Edward, are you going out for drinks again tonight?" I asked, sitting alone at the dining table as he got ready to leave. "Sorry, a coworker invited me out. I'll be back soon, so don't wait up." Edward was hurrying out the door and barely gave me an answer. "Lately, you've been going out more often, haven't you?" I asked him, trying to hide my worry. But without even looking back, he just said, "Nah, it's not like that." And with that, he closed the door. Watching him walk away, I felt a deep unease. I had thought countless times about having a serious conversation, but even when we did talk, Edward's behavior never changed. Whenever I confided in friends, they would worry and say things like, "Why are you putting up with this? You should just leave him already." But I would just shake my head and reply, "I know, but I just can't bring myself to leave him. Maybe I still love him." Even I couldn't understand why I clung to him so tightly. After spending 10 years together, I just couldn't let him go so easily. "Is it because you still love him?" a friend once asked me. I paused, taken aback by the question. "I don't know. Maybe I'm just scared to be without him." The words slipped out of my mouth, and even I was surprised by them. Maybe it was true that a fear of being left alone had bound me to him all along. Then finally, I became pregnant. It was the moment I had longed for. "Edward, guess what? I'm pregnant." Overwhelmed with happiness, I couldn't wait to share the news with him. I hoped that maybe this would change things. "Oh, really? That's good," he replied, seeming mildly surprised, but with a faint smile. "Aren't you excited?" I asked, looking for reassurance. "Well, I guess I am. Hey, if it's a girl, how about Lily? It has a nice ring to it." "Lily? Yeah, that is a cute name." Though a bit uneasy about his reaction, I held on to the hope that our growing family would lead to some change in him. But that hope was swiftly crushed. Even after I became pregnant, Edward kept coming home late, spending less and less time with me. "Edward, once the baby's born, will you be home a bit more?" I asked. Well, maybe once work settles down. I'm just really busy right now." His response felt hollow. As I continued to prepare for the baby alone, I found myself constantly questioning, why am I in this situation? I think I'm reaching my limit. I murmured to myself, countless times. Friends encouraged me, saying, "You should get a divorce already," but I just couldn't take that final step. One night, I finally confronted Edward. "Why are you so indifferent? I just want us to be close again, like we used to be." "I'm not indifferent, but work is hard, and honestly, being home feels tough too," Edward replied, his voice laced with irritation. I caught my breath at his words. Had our home ceased to be a place he wanted to return to? "Is it my fault?" I murmured, trying to hold back tears, though deep inside, I knew I was reaching my limit. Looking back, I still don't fully understand myself from that time. Why didn't I leave him then? I asked myself again and again. Maybe it was because I still loved Edward that I couldn't consider leaving him back then. But now things were different. For the sake of my unborn daughter, I had finally made up my mind to move forward. I decided to stop hoping for anything from Edward. Just as I resolved to stop expecting anything, Edward surprised me once more. "Cynthia, this is sudden, but I've been asked to go on a business trip to France," he said, sounding a bit proud. "France? When?" "In about 2 months. That'll be when the baby's only about a month old." "Why so sudden?" I feigned surprise, but inside, I was already laughing. France. It was an obvious lie. He was just a regular office worker, and I had never heard of him going on any overseas business trips. Plus, Edward didn't speak a word of French. "Yeah, well, apparently the company landed a huge project out of nowhere, and they specially selected me for it," he continued, embellishing his story. I narrowed my eyes, studying him. Whenever he lied, he had a habit of touching his nose. And sure enough, his fingers were unconsciously drifting toward his nose. He was so transparent. "Edward, are you sure you'll be all right? You know you need to speak French to work there, don't you?" "Oh, no, I won't need to speak French. I'll have an interpreter. Plus I know a bit, like oui and non and stuff like that." Edward, nervously touching his nose, scrambled to keep up his excuses. "What kind of job can you do with just oui and non?" I asked, half amused but pressing on. "Well, I mean, it's not too complicated, but it's something I just have to do. It's a life or death kind of project," he stammered, sounding increasingly desperate. His words became so absurd that my anger was replaced by an urge to laugh. "A life or death project, huh? Edward, you're a sales rep, aren't you?" I shot back sharply. At that, he froze and touched his nose again. "Yes, but this time it's different. It's not just sales. It's more of an urgent mission." His words were growing increasingly incoherent. Watching him flounder with such a blatant lie, I almost found myself impressed by how badly he was managing it. "All right, just take care of yourself. Don't overdo it," I said, deciding not to push any further. It was pointless to confront him here and now. And above all, I wanted to avoid unnecessary stress for the sake of the baby. But inside, I was completely fed up. Edward's lie was so childish, so transparent, and it amazed me that he didn't even realize how obvious it was. "Cynthia, will you be okay while I'm gone? Taking care of the house, the baby preparations." "I'll be fine. I've been managing everything on my own, so don't worry. I'll be fine even without you here," I replied with a hint of sarcasm, though it seemed to go right over his head. "All right, thanks." He touched his nose again. Edward continued bringing up the trip, preparing as if it was some grand, important mission. By now, I didn't even care where he was actually going or what he was planning. The more I watched him, the more I felt my love for him fade. "Cynthia, if anything happens while I'm away, just reach out, okay?" No matter how busy I am, I'll be thinking of you and the baby. Yes, don't worry about us. Just focus on your work, I replied calmly, with a firm resolve not to expect anything more from him. I already knew exactly what he was planning with this so-called trip to France, but I was done letting it get to me. I had to look ahead and move forward for the sake of our child and my own life. Cynthia, I'm off. I'll do my best, he said, smiling as he left, touching his nose one last time. Watching him go, I let out a quiet sigh. His words had lost all meaning for me. A business trip to France. That lie wouldn't fool me. The way Edward kept touching his nose, his clumsy attempts to hide his infidelity, everything was as transparent as glass. Instinctively, I knew this was no business trip. It was a secret getaway. Determined to uncover the truth, I began investigating Edward's behavior. Though I was close to giving birth, my mind was now occupied with his possible affair. The urge to confirm my suspicions grew stronger, so I turned to social media. I wanted to see who Edward had been following lately, who he was interacting with. Maybe there'd be some clue there. Who among the women Edward follows might be suspicious? I wondered as I checked one profile after another. Then I stumbled upon a private account that caught my attention. Who's this account? The profile had no photo and very few posts, but I recognized a familiar name among the followers. Angela. She was a high school classmate and, more importantly, Edward's ex-girlfriend. My sense of caution spiked instantly. Angela was notorious back in the day, always getting involved with multiple guys. If Edward had reconnected with her, she was likely his affair partner. How can I take a closer look at this account? After a moment of thought, I decided to create a fake profile using an AI-generated, handsome-looking man's photo, and I sent Angela a follow request. If this works. A few hours later, my phone pinged with a notification. Angela had accepted the request. Of course, I muttered. I immediately scrolled through her posts, only to discover a shocking truth. Angela was planning a trip to France with Edward. This man is truly the lowest of the low. I felt a burning fury rise within me. He was planning a vacation with his mistress while I was close to giving birth. In that moment, whatever lingering love I had for Edward was completely extinguished. It was now painfully clear that expecting anything from him was a waste. Edward, we're done. I declared it firmly in my heart, beginning to think seriously about my future. As my due date approached, the day finally came. Labor started, and I began preparing to head to the hospital. Edward had told me to call him if it seemed like the baby was coming, but I had no intention of contacting him. Edward was off somewhere, likely drinking with someone, oblivious to the fact that his child was about to be born. Even the midwife asked, "Are you going to call your husband?" It didn't matter. He won't be here. He's too busy enjoying his affair, I answered calmly, though anger simmered beneath the surface. As night fell, the labor pains intensified, reaching their peak. Through the agony, I fought with everything I had for my child. I don't need a man like him. I'll be fine on my own. With all my anger channeled into pushing, I finally brought my daughter into the world. "Thank you for being born," I whispered, holding her tightly as tears slipped down my cheeks. In that moment, it felt like everything had been worth it. No matter how difficult things had been, I was now determined to live my life alongside this child. On the day of our discharge, I opened the door nervously to find Edward waiting in the living room. He quickly stood and walked over to us. "Welcome back. I'm glad it all went well," he said, glancing at me briefly before shifting his gaze to our daughter. For a moment, he simply stared, silent, as if surprised by the sight of his newborn. "So small," he murmured, awkwardly extending his arms to hold the baby. His tense posture made me smile just a little. "She'll be fine as long as you're gentle," I reassured him, carefully placing our daughter in his arms. He held her clumsily, gazing intently at her tiny face. "She's cute." At his words, something within me twinged. Though his words sounded appreciative, they felt hollow. There was no depth of feeling in his tone, no genuine connection that I'd expected from him as a new father. The sense of unity I had hoped for, the joy of becoming a family, was absent in him. After a while, Edward handed our daughter back to me, as if he'd already had enough. "This is going to be tough, huh? What was her name again?" Her name. Our daughter's name. How could he forget? I could only shake my head in disbelief. "You're the one who wanted to name her Lily because it sounded cute." "Oh, right. The three of us can work hard together." "Work hard? At what?" His words felt shallow, almost obligatory. There was no true resolve behind them. Yet somehow, I no longer cared. My mind was already elsewhere. Yes, on my revenge trip to France. But going to France wasn't just about getting revenge on Edward and Angela. I had another, very important reason. "Mom, could I ask you to watch Lily for a little while?" One day, I brought up the idea of leaving my daughter in my mother's care. She looked a little surprised, but immediately agreed without hesitation. Seeing her nod in quiet understanding reassured me. I felt deeply grateful to have her support, especially under these circumstances. "I'm going to France. The captain I've worked with for years is making his final flight from France to America, and I want to be there to see him off." My mother listened, appearing pensive for a moment, but soon she nodded with a look of understanding. Though I could sense a hint of curiosity, she didn't question my choice. I thanked her, deeply appreciating both her kindness and concern. Once I had arranged for Lily's care, I began mentally preparing for the trip. It wasn't just a journey for revenge. It was a farewell to a mentor who'd been there for me through so much. I started getting ready for my flight to France with this in mind. "Edward, I'm going to France, too." "What? To France?" "I'll leave Lily with my mom. It'll be a one-night, 2-day round trip," I said casually one day. "For what?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. "The captain I worked with is having his last flight." "Oh, right. Well, sure, if your mom's watching Lily, go ahead." Watching his nonchalant response, I smirked inwardly. He had no idea what I was up to. And to think that, by pure coincidence, or maybe divine intervention, I'd be on the same flight as Edward and Angela. Through Angela's social media, I already knew they were flying to France together. The fact that I'd be on the same plane felt almost like a message from above, urging me to go through with my plan. On the day of the flight, I smiled and waved as I sideward off. "Take care, and good luck with work," I said cheerfully, but in my heart, I was already saying goodbye. I knew I'd never love that man again. "Thanks. I'll be back soon, don't worry," he replied, completely unsuspecting, as he headed toward the airport. Once I arrived at the airport, I carefully put on a disguise, a hat pulled low, sunglasses, moving inconspicuously. When I spotted Edward and Angela from a distance, I kept a safe distance, but kept them well within my sight. "You two look like you're having fun," I chuckled coldly to myself. Once I boarded the plane, I discovered my seat was just behind Edward and Angela, diagonally. It felt as if fate had perfectly positioned me to observe everything. Asterisk, thank you, God. Asterisk, I thought, sinking into my seat with satisfaction. After takeoff, their conversation gradually reached my ears, and I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "She's a real idiot. She hasn't got the slightest clue I'm lying," Edward said smugly. "Finally, we get some time alone." Forget about Cynthia, let's just enjoy ourselves. Angela replied happily. My anger surged, but I knew I had to stay calm. Blowing up here wouldn't help. Instead, I considered my next move carefully. Sarah, can you come over for a moment? I called out to a friend and fellow flight attendant who was in on my plan and had agreed to help. Been waiting for this. Which seats are they? Her eyes sparkled with intrigue as she came closer. Take a look at the couple in front of me, diagonally to the left. That's my husband with his ex-girlfriend. They planned this whole getaway together. Think you can give them some special service? I whispered. Leave it to me. Sarah grinned mischievously and went back to her duties. Returning to my seat, I kept an eye on the two, quietly envisioning my next steps while feeding the flames of my anger. A husband who abandons his month-old baby to cheat. The real fool here is him, I muttered under my breath, contemplating my plans as the plane continued toward France. But as I waited for the right moment, I noticed Edward and Angela were now complaining to the flight attendants over the smallest inconveniences. The two of them were still lost in their own selfish world. First, Edward raised his voice. Why is this plane shaking so much? Can't you make it fly smoother? He seemed irritated by some mild turbulence, as if the flight attendants had any control over it. Sarah calmly replied, Sir, we can't control the weather, but rest assured we're prioritizing everyone's safety. We appreciate your understanding. Even with Sarah's professional response, Edward's irritation only grew. There better not be any delays. We're supposed to arrive on time. Yay, we're in a hurry, Angela added, piling on her own complaints. Watching their antics, I felt a mixture of embarrassment and disbelief. Delays due to weather are beyond anyone's control, yet these two refused to acknowledge it. My irritation only deepened. I apologize, but delays due to weather are out of our hands. Our priority is a safe arrival, and we appreciate your patience, Sarah said calmly, her voice steady and composed. But they weren't giving up. Well, at least let us move up to business class for free to make it more comfortable, Angela demanded shamelessly. I'm afraid business class is reserved exclusively for guests who have pre-booked it. We encourage you to book business class on your next trip to enjoy an enhanced experience, Sarah replied with a warm smile. With polite but firm composure, she shut down their request, and I felt a wave of relief and pride watching her handle them so deftly. It was baffling to see Edward fawning over such a woman, and to think he was my husband. I felt a flash of embarrassment for myself, too. Then they started complaining about the cabin temperature. Excuse me, if you're feeling chilly, we can provide blankets. For those feeling warm, we'll be happy to bring a cold drink, Sarah offered, gracefully deflecting every demand. Her pores and professionalism were impeccable. Silently, I applauded her handling of every situation, thankful beyond words. Thank you, Sarah. I fought, enjoying each time they were rebuffed, but that enjoyment was short-lived. It was time to execute the next part of my plan. Taking a deep breath to steady myself, I began to act, calm and composed, my resolve quietly set amidst the tension. The moment I saw Angela leave her seat and head to the restroom, I seized the opportunity. Quickly, I signaled to Sarah to bring me a juice. If everything went according to plan, this would be flawless. I followed Angela, moving quietly down the narrow aisle. My heart raced a bit, but I kept calm. This plan had been carefully crafted. Each step required absolute focus and precision. As Angela approached the restroom, I watched her back intently. Without hesitation, I pretended to stumble, spilling my juice all over her. What on earth are you doing? She yelled. Oh dear, I'm so sorry, I replied, just as planned. Angela reacted exactly as I expected, startled and furious. Her face flushed red as she stared down in shock at her juice-soaked clothes. I had to hold back a smirk, keeping my expression cool as I looked at her and calmly asked, "What are you doing here?" Angela looked up, and the moment she recognized me, she froze, eyes wide. "Why, Cynthia, why are you here?" "That's my line," I replied smoothly. Clearly, she hadn't imagined she'd run into me here. I watched her face go pale as she struggled for words. She looked like she wanted to tell Edward, but with her clothes dripping juice, she couldn't very well go back looking like this. Timing couldn't have been more perfect. Just then, Sarah came over, offering a towel. "Are you all right, ma'am?" she asked gently, handing it to Angela, who had no choice but to take it and disappear into the restroom to clean herself up, still flustered. Angela wouldn't be back for a while, which gave me just enough time. I wasn't going to let this chance slip by. The moment she closed the restroom door, I quickly picked up her discarded cap and jacket. Her perfume lingered faintly, but I didn't let that distract me. All that mattered was sticking to the plan. Steeling myself, I moved quietly toward Edward's seat. Edward was slouched in his seat, gazing absently out the window, completely unaware of me. The sight of him so defenseless stirred anger deep inside me, but I had to stay calm. Not yet. I had to keep my emotions in check. Imitating Angela's voice, I spoke softly. "By the way, how's it going with Cynthia? You two getting along?" Edward glanced over at me briefly, then turned back to the window, disinterested. "Not really. I'm only with my wife because her family's rich. It's not like I actually love her." His cold words pierced my ears. I had suspected it before, the fading of Edward's feelings for me, but hearing it so plainly still hurt. "And your daughter? She's adorable, isn't she? Taking care of her must be challenging. Does it feel more real to you now?" I pressed on, keeping my voice steady. Edward hesitated for a moment, then shrugged. "My daughter. Honestly, I don't really get it. She's just a baby, and I don't feel anything." A slow wave of anger rose within me. How could he be so indifferent? This was our precious daughter. Yet to him, she seemed meaningless. Swallowing the pain, I asked him another question. "Don't you love her, my daughter?" He replied, unbothered. "Yes," Edward answered without a hint of hesitation. "Love? I don't know. She's cute because she's a baby, that's all." At that moment, something in me snapped. Anger and sadness swirled inside, but I couldn't tend things just yet. I took a slow breath and asked again, "What about Cynthia? Do you not love her either?" For a second, Edward glanced my way, but then he turned back to the window, answering nonchalantly, "No, I don't love Cynthia." At that moment, I felt nothing but numbness. His indifference, his cruelty, it was all directed at me, and it stung unbearably. Still, there was one last thing I needed to know. "And me? Do you love me?" I asked, maintaining Angela's persona. Finally, Edward turned to look at me, mildly surprised. Yet, there was no emotion in his gaze. "Of course, Angela. I love you." I almost laughed, an angry, bitter laugh. The absurdity of being treated this way, the realization of my own contempt for Edward, filled me with a quiet fury. Then, as I watched, his face shifted from relaxed to alarmed. "Oh my. Wait, Cynthia." It dawned on him at last. The person he'd been speaking to wasn't Angela but Mimi, the one he would have never expected to see here. "What's wrong, Edward? Surprised to see me here?" I looked at Edward calmly, a sarcastic smile on my face. He was speechless, his face pale. I'm sorry. No, it's not like that. It's just. He stumbled over his words, desperately trying to explain, but nothing he said sounded even remotely believable. I stood there, unmoved, watching as his excuses grew emptier by the second. Without saying a word, I continued to look at him, intensifying the pressure. It was just a physical thing with Angela, that's all. There are no feelings, he finally blurted out, a despicable admission. In that instant, I felt a deep sense of contempt. Just a physical thing. Was our relationship so insignificant to him that he could reduce it to that? Edward felt no responsibility toward me or our daughter. There was no reason left for me to have any expectations of him. Just physical. So when you said you loved her, that was a lie. I questioned him, keeping my voice cold and relentless. No, I mean, with Angela. His words were a jumbled mess. I realized it was time to deliver the final blow. Enough, Edward. I'm tired of your lies. No matter what he said, I felt nothing for him anymore. The moment he betrayed me, my decision had been made. I took off my cap and Angela's jacket, then stood up. With my arms crossed, I waited in full view for Angela to return from the restroom. Nearby passengers watched me, some curious, some uneasy, but in that narrow cabin space, I stood alone, controlling the atmosphere. A few minutes later, Angela finally emerged from the restroom, visibly shaken. She immediately began making excuses, stumbling over her own words. I watched her with silent disdain. Don't bother explaining. I already know everything, I said icily. Angela fell silent, her eyes darting to Edward for help, but he made no move to support her. Just then, the flight attendant, Sarah, noticed there was a vacant seat in their row. She kindly offered it to me, and I took her up on it, seating myself firmly between Edward and Angela, and so began a flight from hell. Well then, I said, turning to Edward, care to explain exactly what's going on? I told you, I'm sorry. There's nothing between us. We just happen to be here together, and there are no feelings involved. Really, no feelings. The moment Edward's words left his mouth, Angela let out an outraged gasp. This wasn't what she had expected. Clearly blindsided by the turn of events. An adult relationship, is it? Satisfied with just a physical connection? Well, that's just like you, I replied, thick with sarcasm, pressing Edward further into a corner. He was visibly shaken. Angela sat there, biting her lip, staring blankly ahead, unable to say a word. It was exactly the kind of hellish flight I'd envisioned. As the flight neared its end, I prepared for the next stage of my plan. Waiting until we landed, I had a little surprise in store. I had been recording Edward's entire confession on a recorder, capturing every no feelings, every just physical. And as the plane began to descend, with passengers preparing to disembark, I played the recording out loud for everyone to hear. Listen to this, I said, hitting play. Edward's cold, shameful words filled the cabin, unmistakable in their meaning. Stop it, you're disturbing the other passengers. As the attention of the passengers turned to me, I could see Sarah's face turn pale, and Edward go speechless. The hidden drama on board had finally become a public spectacle. To my relief, no one criticized my actions. In fact, I even received words of encouragement from some of the passengers. This is unbelievable. You promised to leave Cynthia and marry me. Goodbye, Angela said, her voice cracking. She decided then and there to fly back home, even though getting a ticket on such short notice would come at a high price. But she must have preferred that to staying in France. As for Edward, he would now be on his own for every expense: hotel, meals, Everything. Handle it all yourself, Edward. Don't expect any more help from me, I told him icily, looking him dead in the eyes. He stayed silent, completely at a loss. For him, this flight had indeed been pure hell, and I felt utterly satisfied, knowing that everything I'd set up had gone exactly as planned. Angela was flying home, and Edward was left stranded in France, isolated. It couldn't have ended more perfectly. The next day, I boarded my flight back to the U.S., ready to celebrate the captain's last flight and mark my own fresh start. Within days, I decided to pursue a divorce, planning to file for alimony and end things with him once and for all. Since our apartment was actually owned by my father, he would naturally be evicted. Edward soon found himself in a dire financial state. His relationship with his ex-girlfriend Angela had fallen apart, and he was now entirely alone. Meanwhile, I was resolute in my decision to move forward with my daughter, Lily. This experience, while a challenging ordeal, had become the turning point I needed to reclaim my happiness. No longer would I let Edward disrupt my life. From now on, I would focus on building a brighter future for myself and Lily, finally free to pursue the happiness we deserved.
Your daughter cheated on my son. Karen, Sandra's mother-in-law, yelled angrily.
Sandra would never do that.
I desperately defended Sandra's innocence.
Then how do you explain the baby's eye color?
I had no response to that. Sandra was in the corner of the room, holding her baby and crying. The baby in Sandra's arms had blue eyes.
Take her and get out. And later, you'll be paying a hefty sum in the divorce settlement.
We were miserably thrown out. But I was certain Sandra wasn't lying. So, I decided to do a DNA test. When the results came back, Karen and her family realized their mistake. And from there, their lives quickly spiraled downward. My name is Carol. Today was a special day, so I was more enthusiastic than usual. On the table were potato salad, meatloaf, and tomato soup. These were all Sandra's favorites.
It looks so delicious. Thanks, Mom.
Sandra's smile made me so happy. From the large TV in the room, cheerful voices played, and the warm light filled the room. The girl in the painting on the wall seemed to be smiling in celebration for Sandra. Don't hold back. Tomorrow's the big wedding day. Sandra lowered her eyes a bit at the mention of the wedding. I wish Dad could be here. My husband, David, is currently working overseas. It wasn't originally planned, but he had a connection to that country and volunteered for the assignment. However, his work there has been full of troubles, and he couldn't make it back for Sandra's wedding. It's disappointing, but I didn't blame David. He earned the money for this house and Sandra's tuition.
Well, Dad is busy. I'll take lots of pictures to send him. Thanks. I really wanted to live together, but William wouldn't listen.
William is Sandra's fiancé. At his strong request, Sandra would be living with his parents right after the wedding. He's a good man, but without his dad around, he's a bit of a mama's boy, isn't he?
Yes, that worries me, but he's a good person.
Sandra blushed slightly. We wouldn't have many more meals together like this. So, I needed to enjoy this moment. But I had one nagging worry.
But Karen seems kind of strange. I'm worried about living with her.
Karen was William's mother. I first met Karen at a family meeting, but I didn't like her from the start. She was small and thin, her short hair mixed with gray and unkempt. She always had her eyes wide open, which made her seem eerie. Her words also revealed her nervous personality. I was worried about Sandra living with someone like her.
Don't worry so much. We're close by, so if anything happens, you can always come here.
Sandra smiled as she took a big bite of the meatloaf.
Yes, if you need anything, I'm always here to help.
We cut the ominous talk short and spent the rest of the time reminiscing and enjoying each other's company. The wedding went off splendidly, and before we knew it, 6 months had passed. Fortunately, their married life had no major issues, and since living alone was lonely, I started a part-time job. One sunny day, while I was cleaning the house, Sandra came over. She hugged me as soon as she walked in the door.
Mom, I'm pregnant.
Her eyes were shining as she said it. I was thrilled at Sandra's happy news.
Congratulations! Did you tell William? He must be so happy.
When I mentioned William, Sandra's expression suddenly stiffened.
Sandra, what's wrong?
When I looked into Sandra's face, she quickly put on her usual smile. Nothing, it's just... I have a favor to ask. Sandra's demeanor worried me, but I had to hear her request.
A favor? What is it?
Sandra hesitated, lowering her eyes, but then looked me straight in the eye as if making a decision.
I'm nervous about giving birth. I want to stay with you.
I was taken aback by Sandra's unexpected request. I had imagined something serious, thinking it was beyond my control.
Oh, if that's the case, there's no problem. Stay as long as you like. Thank you.
Sandra seemed relieved, exhaling deeply. I wondered if it was okay not to tell Karen, but I assumed Sandra had informed William. However, I soon learned why Sandra's expression had clouded. Sandra quickly packed some basic items and came to stay with me, but soon after, William came over.
Oh, hello. Is something wrong?
William didn't respond to my question, standing in the doorway with a pouty expression. I didn't know what to do and stood there awkwardly until Sandra appeared.
What are you doing here?
Sandra's words made William finally lift his head.
Mom told me to keep an eye on you since you're at your parents' house.
William pouted like a sulking child.
But I explained everything.
Why did you follow me? Sandra seemed exasperated by William's actions. They argued for a while, but in the end, William ended up staying at my house. He hadn't brought much, so we had to buy a new toothbrush and underwear for him. Even though he was Sandra's husband, having a man suddenly living in the house made me uncomfortable. Sandra also seemed to find William a bit annoying, but he didn't cause any particular problems. Thus, without any major incidents, we settled into a smooth routine. Sandra was admitted to the hospital for childbirth, and William went back to his in-laws' house, so the house became quiet again. I realized for the first time in months how lonely it is without Sandra's morning greeting. To distract myself from the loneliness, I put extra effort into getting ready for work. Just as I stepped out of the house, my neighbor greeted me kindly.
Oh, Carol. Thank you so much the other day, you really helped me out. It's nothing. I'm always here if you need anything. Everyone in the neighborhood appreciates you. If you ever need help, just let us know.
I felt my face flush with a mix of happiness and embarrassment.
Thank you. I'm off to work now. Good luck.
I often helped out my neighbors, so it was common to receive thanks like this. However, I felt embarrassed because I thought I was just doing what was expected. Besides, everyone was so kind and gentle that I never felt like I was at a loss. All right, time to get to work. I shifted my focus and headed to my workplace. Just before my lunch break, I received an emergency call. It was William.
Sandra's contractions have started.
Please come quickly. Feeling a sense of unease at his robotic tone, I left work early and rushed to the hospital. When I arrived, Karen was already there, but she ignored me and kept talking to William. It seemed neither of them planned to be present for the birth, so I decided to wait in front of the delivery room. I was too worried about the baby being born safely to be bothered by their behavior. And equally, I was looking forward to seeing what kind of child would be born. I wasn't sure how much time had passed. Suddenly, the sound of a baby's cry echoed from the room. I looked up to see a nurse peeking out from the door.
The baby is born safely. It's a girl.
I immediately entered the delivery room to see Sandra, sweating but with a relieved expression, holding the baby. I stared at the tiny grandchild in Sandra's arms. The baby, so small, hadn't even opened her eyes yet. The baby was quickly handed over to William.
Sandra, you did great. You were amazing.
Sandra, exhausted, only nodded without replying. Meanwhile, Karen and William were busy discussing what to name the baby. Even after handing the baby to me, they didn't offer any words of praise to Sandra. Instead, they ignored her and didn't even look her way. Watching the two of them, I became worried if Sandra would be all right continuing her married life like this. Fortunately, Sandra and the baby had no health issues, so they were discharged soon. I was eager to see my granddaughter Nancy's face, but I didn't feel like going to the in-laws' house. However, I couldn't tell Sandra to come to my place, so I continued my usual routine. A few weeks after Sandra's discharge, I was at home on my day off. Unfortunately, it was raining outside, so I stayed indoors. Suddenly, the doorbell rang, followed by loud banging on the front door. Startled, I headed to the door and heard shouting from the other side.
Hey, I know you're in there. Open the door.
With trembling hands, I unlocked the door. As soon as I did, Karen shoved her way in, glaring at me with wide eyes.
How dare you deceive William? Take responsibility.
She yelled, her eyes bloodshot and spittle flying. Karen stood behind William, who had a robotic expression on his face.
Wait a minute. What's going on?
I tried to understand the situation, but Karen wouldn't listen.
Do you think you can fool me just because you're rich? I'll make you pay in the divorce court.
She pointed her finger at my face and advanced, causing me to step back.
What is this about? Please explain.
Karen's shrill yelling pierced my ears, giving me a headache.
She cheated. Mom is angry. You need to take responsibility. Enough already.
If this one-sided yelling continued, I felt like I'd lose my mind from the stress. Upon hearing my shout, Karen stopped yelling and stared at me, eyes wide and mouth half open.
I'm sorry. I have no idea what's going on. You need to explain, or I can't say anything.
But Karen and William remained silent. After a brief silence, Karen, with an unchanged expression, spoke.
Fine. Then come to our house.
Following Karen's suggestion, I went to the in-laws' house for the first time. It wasn't far, so we walked. I already felt like I had used more than half of my energy. Reluctantly, I followed the two, carrying an umbrella, while our neighbors looked on worriedly. The in-laws' house was in an old residential area, and the interior was outdated. The color of the wood on the ceiling and walls was dull and dirty, and the floor was old. The lighting was still old fluorescent lights, making the already gloomy weather worse. The furniture and appliances were also old, as if time had stopped 30 years ago. In a corner of the room, Sandra sat with tears in her eyes, holding Nancy tightly.
Sandra, what happened?
Karen answered instead of Sandra.
Look at the color of that child's eyes.
Following Karen's command, I looked into Nancy's eyes. I was shocked and let out a scream. Nancy's eyes were blue.
Now do you understand what we mean? Sandra cheated. Those eyes are proof. Now take responsibility.
Sandra, with eyes full of tears, glared at Karen.
You're wrong. I didn't cheat. Shut up. How dare you betray my precious William?
William joined in.
It's not just me. You made Mom angry too. You'll pay for her retirement as well.
I listened in silence. It was true, Sandra and William both had brown eyes. But I knew Sandra better than anyone. There was no hint of deceit in her expression. I believed Sandra.
Wait. Let's calm down. There must be some explanation. There is no explanation. Sandra cheated, and the color of the baby's eyes is proof.
Karen, with bloodshot eyes, pointed at Nancy. Nancy started to cry.
Oh, I'm sorry. Don't cry, sweetheart.
Sandra desperately tried to soothe Nancy, but the two didn't care. I was worried that continuing the argument here would negatively affect Sandra and Nancy.
Wait. Let's not fight in front of Nancy. Can we go to another room?
The two nodded and led us to the next room. But it was more to escape the crying than for Nancy's sake. Sandra tried to follow, but I stopped her with my hand. You stay here and take care of Nancy. Don't worry, I'll handle this. I didn't want my beloved Sandra to suffer anymore. Mom. However, the discussion didn't progress in the other room either. I desperately explained that Sandra didn't know anyone close with blue eyes.
That's not proof. People can have relationships through social media nowadays.
But they countered. It seems William is more concerned with how much alimony and settlement money he can claim from us in the divorce trial than with the fact that he's been cheated on. No matter what I say, the conversation always turns to money. But there was one unforgivable thing that made me so angry I could barely think about the money. It was Karen's words.
Sandra was supposed to take care of me, but now everything has gone to waste. She needs to take responsibility. Why is caregiving a given? That's just ridiculous.
Does she think Sandra is some sort of housekeeper who can provide care? Even if she's William's wife, there's no way I can allow that kind of treatment. But it seems Karen was seriously planning to use Sandra for her convenience until the very end. And William seemed to think that was completely normal. It was then that I realized just how abnormal this family was.
This isn't going to work. Take that kid and that useless Sandra and leave. I don't want to see them.
Karen spat out those words, and for once, I agreed with her. I didn't want Sandra to stay in that place a second longer. I immediately took Sandra and left the house. Sandra cried the whole way home, but once we got back, she seemed a bit more at ease. Her expression softened, and she spoke kindly to Nancy. Sandra, I believe you. But I need to ask. You really didn't cheat, did you?
No, absolutely not.
Sandra looked me straight in the eye, not flinching. As I thought, there was no lie or evasion in her gaze. All right then. So why does Nancy have blue eyes? That's the real problem. I thought about it on the way home, but I had no idea. So I decided to contact David, who was overseas. But no matter how many times I called, I couldn't reach him. Even with the time difference, it shouldn't be that late over there. I decided to call his company directly. It took a bit of effort, but I finally got through to someone there and explained that I needed to talk to David. But it was no use. David was currently working in a remote mountain area, making it difficult to get in touch with him. I was worried about him working in such a place, but there was nothing I could do, so I left a message for him to call me when he returned. Dad seems to be having a tough time. Why did he have to go overseas? Sandra murmured as she looked out at the rain falling outside the window. Who knows, but he must have had his reasons. He doesn't talk much about himself. But I've been thinking, and I need you to hear me out. Sandra turned slowly towards me.
What is it?
To prove your words are true, we need to do a DNA test. I know you don't like it, but please cooperate. There was really nothing else we could do. No matter what we said, we were at a severe disadvantage trying to convince Karen and William. So we needed to use science to prove it. With that, even in court, we could help Sandra. Sandra's eyes lit up at the mention of a DNA test.
A DNA test, huh? That's a good idea. But will William agree to it?
Sandra's concern was soon proven right. On the next day off, I went to the in-laws' house to tell them about the DNA test. As before, the overcast sky made the in-laws' house look like a gloomy cave.
So, we'll get the alimony and settlement money in the divorce trial, right?
Karen was in a much better mood than before.
Yes, and I need to talk to you about that.
At that moment, William came in and made us coffee.
Thank you.
William, you're so good. Such a good boy, Karen said happily while patting William's head. He looked happy to be praised by Karen too.
You two get along well, don't you?
When I said that, Karen and William both looked at me with big smiles. Of course. Since my ex-husband left, William is the only family I have. I love him so much.
I love Mom too.
Karen and William seemed as close as lovers. Honestly, it's terrifying to bring up the DNA test at a time like this, but we can't move forward without it.
So, to clear things up, I think we should do a DNA test.
As soon as I said that, Karen and William froze. Then Karen's eyes widened again, and William looked like a robot.
A DNA test? Are you planning to hurt William?
It seems I've triggered a bad switch.
Your family is the worst. You don't trust us? You look down on us? You don't need a test to know about the affair.
Another attack, but this is the crucial moment.
With scientific evidence, we can both be convinced. We will cover the cost, of course. Science? Just because you're rich, you look down on us. You look down on poor people. I can't take it anymore. William, punish them.
At Karen's command, William stood up expressionlessly.
Please, it's a simple thing. Shut up. I'll post this on social media. William, get the kitchen knife.
Got it, Mom. William immediately headed to the kitchen. It's dangerous to stay here any longer. I took advantage of a moment's distraction, ran past Karen, and dashed to the front door. I grabbed my shoes and rushed out the door.
Wait! You won't get away with this. I'll make you pay.
Karen's screams echoed behind me as I desperately fled. After running a bit, I looked back and saw that Karen wasn't following, so I put on my shoes. The soles of my feet were blistered and painful, but my life was saved. I managed to get back home, but from that day, Karen's harassment began. She posted papers around the neighborhood saying Sandra had an affair, and sometimes she and William would walk around shouting it. I went to the police, but they wouldn't take it seriously because it wasn't a crime. I had to quit my part-time job and couldn't leave the house. This happened almost every day, but at least they didn't come on rainy days. I felt relieved as I watched the rain through the window, knowing Karen wouldn't come. Sandra looked a bit haggard from the stress, but she continued to take care of Nancy without complaint. When Nancy was born, everything was peaceful. I absent-mindedly recalled when Sandra was pregnant. William had forced his way into our home back then. If I had noticed how abnormal he and Karen were at that time, Sandra wouldn't have had to suffer. We had to buy daily necessities for him, but he never paid us back. It was just things like toothbrushes and underwear, not expensive enough to bother billing him for. There, I realized something. That's it. The toothbrush. I haven't thrown it away yet. I immediately went to the bathroom, opened the cabinet, and found William's toothbrush hidden in the corner. I carefully picked it up like a precious treasure and placed it in a plastic bag.
Sandra, I found the toothbrush William used. We can do a DNA test with this.
When I showed Sandra the toothbrush in the bag, her eyes lit up. Soon after, a DNA test was conducted to determine who Nancy's parents were. During that time, Karen's harassment continued, but we waited patiently. Unlike before, we now had hope with the DNA test. It had to be okay. Finally, the envelope with the results arrived, and we opened it together. The results clearly stated that Nancy was indeed Sandra and William's child. Sandra read it and then collapsed to the floor, crying loudly. Whether she was crying out of happiness or frustration, I couldn't tell. What was certain was that she hadn't cheated, and that was a relief. However, the mystery of Nancy's blue eyes was still unresolved. The answer came soon after from a call from David.
Sorry for the late response. What on earth happened?
I explained everything that had happened and finally asked if he knew why Nancy's eyes were blue. David didn't reply immediately but seemed to be thinking. After a while, he started to speak. I've never mentioned this before, but I have a mix of blood from various countries. The country I'm stationed in now is my grandma's homeland. I felt a connection and requested to be stationed here.
I didn't know you had such a reason.
Sorry about that. This is just my theory, but Grandma had blue eyes. If that gene persisted and showed up in Sandra's child, it would explain everything. With David's explanation, all the mysteries were solved, and Sandra and I hugged each other in joy. The next day was sunny, and soon Karen and William came to our house. Since I had the DNA test results as evidence, I invited them in. As soon as they entered the living room, they sat down and started demanding money.
We won't leave until you pay. We might as well live here from now on.
Saying that, they refused to budge. So, I showed them the DNA test documents. After reading them, they immediately started complaining again.
This is fake. You made this to deceive us.
If that's the case, we can do another test. The toothbrush will be enough. But if they were the type to back down easily, we wouldn't have had so much trouble. Instead of admitting their fault, Karen got angry and crumpled up the report, throwing it at me.
Don't get cocky. This fake document means nothing. Then explain why Nancy's eyes are blue.
I explained to Karen exactly what David had told me.
It's in the genes, so it's possible. If you're still unsatisfied, there's always genetic testing.
I made sure to maintain a firm and calm demeanor. The website advised that this was the best way to handle someone like Karen. As expected, Karen and William didn't push further. They seemed to be thinking of a better strategy but couldn't come up with anything. Acting as if nothing had happened, they stood up. Fine. We'll leave for today. Saying that, Karen and William headed to the door, and I followed them out.
Wait a moment. At least apologize to Sandra. You accused her so harshly.
But Karen wouldn't listen and even spat at me.
Shut up. What makes you think you've won? Now I'll post your misdeeds all over social media. Just you wait.
Mom, I'll help too. I'll post embarrassing pictures of Sandra on social media. With those words, the two left the house.
Stop right there.
I couldn't let Karen and William ruin Sandra's life any further. I quickly put on my sandals and rushed outside, only to be met with an unexpected scene. About 10 of our neighbors were surrounding Karen and William, glaring at them.
What do you think you're doing? This is none of your business.
Karen's voice trembled, clearly intimidated by the sheer number of people.
It is our business. You've caused Carol so much trouble. Did you think you could just leave without any consequences?
With those words from a neighbor, everyone started raising their voices. The neighbors surrounded Karen and William, demanding,
Apologize to Carol and Sandra right now.
They shouted in unison. Even the usually brazen Karen was unable to fight back against the crowd of people. Whenever she tried to escape, they quickly blocked her path. For a while, Karen and William stood there, frozen in place. Eventually, they gave in and agreed to apologize to me and Sandra.
We're very sorry. That's not enough. Promise that you'll stay away from us from now on. And delete those photos of Sandra, right here in front of everyone.
I demanded, my tone firm and resolute. But Karen remained silent, sweat beading on her forehead. She likely realized that without those photos, she would no longer have any leverage over us. It was only after the neighbors yelled at them that Karen and William finally accepted my demands. As soon as the apology was over, they scurried away like frightened mice. I was filled with gratitude for the help of my neighbors.
Everyone, I'm so sorry for causing you all this trouble.
But they all looked at me with kind, understanding eyes.
You have nothing to apologize for, dear. We all look out for each other in times of need. You're always there for us, Carol. And we all believed that you were doing the right thing.
At those words, I felt like everything I had been through was finally worth it, and tears began to flow freely down my cheeks. I turned to see Sandra holding Nancy close, crying tears of relief as well. From then on, our days were peaceful and uneventful. On sunny days, bright light streamed into our home, filling it with warmth. In that cozy glow, Nancy would energetically crawl around, playing with her toys. Sandra and I watched over her with adoring smiles.
I'm so glad everything worked out, even though it was really tough for a while there. Me too. But who would have thought Karen would end up getting exposed on social media like that? Well, she did bring a lot of attention to herself. And William got demoted and sent to some remote location, too.
I had heard about their fates from the neighbors. Apparently, Karen became so famous that people started vandalizing her house, and she couldn't even go outside anymore. It must be emotionally devastating for her, especially with her beloved William being so far away now. It can't be helped. We did what we could, I said, feeling a twinge of unease as I thought about Karen and William's situation.
Exactly. We went through so much. But I'm just so grateful that we have Nancy now.
Sandra gazed adoringly at Nancy as she spoke. Nancy's once pale blue eyes had darkened over time, turning a rich shade of brown. Without those eyes, Sandra's life would have taken a very different, darker path. Nancy truly saved us in more ways than one.
Well then, I'd better head out and do some shopping. I want to cook an extra special meal tonight,
I announced, standing up and slinging my shopping bag over my shoulder. His favorite dishes were all memorized, clear as day in my mind. It has been a while since Dad's been home, hasn't it?
Yep. That's why I've got to go all out.
I was excited to cook for David again after so long. He must be looking forward to seeing Nancy too. Our whole family would finally be together again. Feeling the joy of spending time with my loved ones, I headed out to the store. You know what, actually? Daddy has been.
What?
I was stunned by my young daughter's confession. That man. I can't believe he's been doing this behind my back. I will never forgive him. In that moment, I vowed to do whatever it takes to send my husband to hell and make him regret it with every fiber of his being. My name is Nancy, and I'm a 42-year-old who can't handle the heat. Every year when summer comes around, my appetite plummets and I lose all my energy. I'm not sure if it's because of my poor lifestyle habits or if the summer heat has just been insane lately, but this year, I'm determined to at least get some sugar in my system by stocking up on ice cream to help me get through it. I try all sorts of things to cope with the summer, but I have painful memories of winter too. This was a few years ago. I thought I was living happily with my husband Ken and our daughter Ellie, or so I thought.
Ellie, let's go out with Daddy.
Okay. Ellie replied as Ken took her hand and tried to leave the house. For some reason, our daughter didn't seem too enthused.
That sounds nice. Where are you going? Take me with you,
I said to Ken, feeling a bit excited. Huh? Nancy, you don't need to come, he retorted.
What?
You've got a lot of housework to do, right? Just stay home and take care of it.
What's that supposed to mean? You said the same thing last time and didn't take me with you. Have you been cold to me lately?
I could tell from his straight face that he wasn't joking, but I wanted to believe it was a joke, so I tried to play it off. But Ken just said, "It's out of consideration for you, since you're so busy, Nancy." He spat out those words that couldn't possibly be sincere, then headed to the parking lot with Ellie in tow. If he really wanted to be considerate, wouldn't he normally say something like, "Let's go out to take a break since housework is tough," or "I'll help you out"? Lately, Ken has been going out somewhere with just Ellie more and more often. If I say I want to go too, like I did earlier, he turns me down. And when I ask the two of them where they went after they get back, they just say it's a secret. I wonder if my family hates me. If Ellie hates me, maybe it's because I'm always nagging her and getting angry about her picky eating. Maybe it's because Ken knows I'm a stay-at-home mom, and lately I haven't even been putting much effort into my makeup since I only go out for shopping in the neighborhood. As I thought about it more, I started to feel like I had some shortcomings of my own. I decided to spruce myself up today. After finishing the housework, I did my makeup and prepared a dinner full of Ellie's favorite dishes, eagerly awaiting their return. However,
Welcome home, Ken. You too, Ellie,
I greeted them with a smile as they walked in. But Ken merely said, "I'm back," without even making eye contact with me. Ellie looked tired, probably from playing all day.
Ellie, did you have fun on your outing?
Yeah. You didn't have fun?
That's not true, right, Ellie?
Ken interjected into the conversation, even though I was asking Ellie. Prompted by Ken, Ellie replied,
"It was fun."
But her response seemed somewhat hesitant. Usually when Ellie truly enjoys herself, she shares the day's events with me, adding her own commentary. Meanwhile, Ken seemed flustered by Ellie's lackluster reaction. Was it because she didn't enjoy the place he took her to? Or were the two of them hiding something? Neither Ken nor Ellie said anything more, so I had no proof. They might have genuinely just gone out to hang, but the fact that they didn't invite me along left a strange, unsettled feeling in my gut. By the way, the only person who noticed my makeup and outfit that day was Ellie, who had regained her energy later on.
"Mom, you look pretty today,"
Ellie remarked. Upon hearing her words, Ken glanced at me briefly, but all he said was, "She sure does." And that was the end of it. He could have said a little more than that, don't you think? I felt the urge to lash out in anger, but the fact that my appearance went largely unnoticed might mean my efforts were misguided. And here I was, convinced that the two of them had grown to hate me. Even though they're my own family, I really didn't know what I should do. Even after that, Ken continued to take only Ellie out somewhere every weekend. No matter what I said, he still wouldn't bring me along with them. Their return time gradually got later and later, from 7 p.m. to 8 p.m., until eventually they didn't come home until 10 p.m. A new record for the latest they'd been out. Ellie was fast asleep, carried on Ken's back. His behavior had finally gone too far, so I couldn't help but scold Ken as soon as he got home.
Hey! Where on earth are you taking Ellie this late at night? She has kindergarten tomorrow. You need to put her to bed early, not drag her around until the middle of the night.
At my words, Ken furrowed his brow as if to say I was being annoying. Ignoring me completely as if he couldn't even hear my voice, he headed straight upstairs to the bedroom.
Are you listening? If you dote on Ellie enough to take her out to play every week, then at least think about her health too. Shut up, will ya?
Ken suddenly raised his voice. Ellie, who had been sound asleep, must have woken up from Ken's shouting and started crying.
Ellie, come here, come here. Don't cry,
I said as I pulled Ellie away from Ken's back and held her close.
Don't yell when Ellie's here.
I rebuked Ken.
What's your problem, Nancy? Getting all grumpy the moment I come home. Are you in a bad mood because you don't get to go out with us? That's not it at all. I'm just saying if you're going to take Ellie out, consider the time. So you're jealous of Ellie because she always gets to go out with me, huh? Why do you interpret it that way? Isn't it normal for a parent not to want their child out late at night?
Just get my shower ready. Bring me a change of clothes.
What's with that tone? You know what? Forget it. Get your own clothes. Huh? You always bring them for me, don't you? It's your fault for making me angry with your attitude. I'm not doing anything for you.
You're a horrible woman.
I married the wrong person,
Ken said, giving me a cold stare that seemed unthinkable for a husband looking at his wife. He slammed the door shut with a deliberately loud noise and stomped off towards the bathroom with heavy footsteps. I couldn't help but feel scared. What's his deal? I don't think I said anything wrong. If anything, Ken lacks awareness as a father when it comes to Ellie. He used to be much more family-oriented, and he wasn't the type of person to express anger in a way that terrified those around him. How did he end up like this? It's been about 6 years since we got married. Maybe it's time to reevaluate our relationship as husband and wife. Ever since the incident that day, Ken's careless treatment of me has become more noticeable. Take care of this for me, he said.
Huh?
It was a Sunday. What Ken handed me was a single memo. Written in Ken's handwriting were things like ice cream and pizza.
What's this? You want me to go buy this stuff? You're not doing anything anyway, right?
Please.
No way, you're just lounging around the house doing nothing too. Go buy it yourself.
What?
You're a stay-at-home wife. Don't you dare defy me. Whose money do you think allows you to live comfortably? And whose hard work do you think allows you to live without doing any housework? Ken, you earn the money, I work at home. It's just a division of roles, right? We should be equals.
You're not cute at all. Why would he say something like that just because I stated the obvious? Ellie must have noticed my irritation, as she was looking at me with an awkward expression. I quickly forced a smile and beamed at Ellie alone.
Anyway, at least do your own shopping.
At my words, "You're so stingy," Ken grumbled. I wanted to complain that even little Ellie does things for herself, but I kept quiet because it would only lead to a big fight. Lately, my fights with Ken have been increasing at this rate. Thinking it would be a bad influence on Ellie, I tried my best to suppress my feelings and avoid clashing with Ken as much as possible. Isn't there some way to rebuild a good relationship with Ken again? At this rate, the thought of divorce might cross my mind. Ellie is attached to Ken too, so I want to avoid that option as much as possible. I racked my brain trying to think if there was anything I could do as a parent and as a wife. But Ken probably doesn't consider my feelings at all. He takes Ellie out less often now, but his late-night outings have increased. He'd leave the house saying he's going for a walk after dinner and not return for hours. He's also frequently out of the house on his days off. Maybe he doesn't like being together because our fights have increased. I keep trying to get along with him, but it's all in vain. I feel like even Ellie's expression has somehow gotten gloomier. Unsure of what to do, I suggested to Ken that we go out as a family.
Ellie's birthday is coming up, so let's go to the aquarium or something and then eat out on the way back. To celebrate her birthday.
At my suggestion,
I want to see the dolphins.
Ellie was overjoyed. Although there was an air about Ken that he wanted to refuse, he must have judged from Ellie's demeanor that he couldn't say no.
All right.
He agreed. I thought that if we spent time together as a family, surely this awkward atmosphere would change. By having fun outside instead of inside the house, I believed our conversations would increase, but then…
What? You have to work? Sorry, but I have to go to the office.
See ya.
Wait a minute.
On Ellie's birthday, Ken said,
I got a call from the company summoning me, so I'm going to work.
And left without apologizing. Mom, what about the aquarium? Ellie had tears in her eyes. Bewildered by the sudden turn of events, I couldn't bring myself to say we weren't going or that we would go.
I'm sorry.
So I vaguely consoled Ellie. In the end, Ellie and I went to the aquarium together that day, but we canceled the dining out plans in case Ken came home. However, Ken didn't contact us at all even late into the night, and shockingly, he didn't return until morning.
What's the meaning of canceling our family plans, not contacting us, and coming home in the morning?
I had waited up for Ken without sleeping, and the moment he got home, I couldn't help but yell at him. But without looking the least bit sorry.
It can't be helped since it was for work.
Ken retorted.
I'm not angry that it was canceled because of work. I'm angry that you don't have the slightest intention of apologizing, Ken. Yesterday too. Ellie was so excited, so I at least took her to the aquarium, but she had a sad look on her face the whole time because you weren't there. Ellie said she wanted to eat out with the three of us, Daddy included, so we canceled the restaurant reservation and waited for you. When you cancel plans like that, don't you think your family might be waiting for you at home? Even now, you can't even say a single sorry.
My grievances against Ken came pouring out one after another like a dam had burst. I felt like I shouldn't say these things, but I couldn't stop myself anymore.
You're the one who waited up on your own accord, right, Nancy? If you're going to complain so much, you should have just gone to sleep instead of purposely staying awake and waiting. Don't use Ellie as an excuse to cover up your own bad mood. You're just getting irrationally angry on your own, aren't you? How did it turn into that? Don't you feel anything about canceling Ellie's birthday plans? I've told you over and over, haven't I? It was for work.
Are you telling me to quit my job, Nancy?
That's not what I… Enough! I'm exhausted. I'm taking a shower and going to bed.
Saying that, Ken turned his face away, just like when we fought before, and went to the bathroom. I've tried to convince myself countless times that it couldn't be true, but maybe it really is impossible for us to continue as husband and wife. Even if we stay together in a loveless marriage for Ellie's sake, if she senses something off about our relationship in the future, will end up hurting her anyway. If we keep up this awkward state, it's only a matter of time before Ellie notices. Ellie's not that dense. But the Ellie right now loves both Ken and me. If we got divorced and she was told she could only choose one parent, wouldn't that be painful for her? Unable to decide whether to divorce or not, my heart wavered. Then one day,
Ellie, I'm sorry we couldn't go to the aquarium for your birthday the other day. How about taking a bath with Daddy today?
bath time! I want to play with Ducky. Ellie was delighted to be invited to take a bath by Ken. How many years has it been since Ken took a bath together with Ellie? But it seems Ken feels bad about the other day in his own way. He doesn't have to apologize to me, but I at least wanted him to feel sorry for Ellie, so I was a little relieved to hear him say sorry.
Mommy, Daddy said he'll play with me in the bath. That's great, Ellie.
Ellie happily hugged her bath toys and skipped off towards the bathroom, thinking how adorable she was in my doting parent way.
Have fun,
I said to Ken. Ken merely replied, yeah. He's still cold towards me as always, but that's fine for now. Just seeing Ellie looking so happy is enough. Or so I thought. It was about 20 minutes after the two of them had gone to take a bath.
Nancy! Nancy! Help!
I heard Ken's loud voice. Thinking something had happened to Ellie, I hurried to the bathroom to find Ken collapsed on the floor.
Ken! What's wrong?
I called out to him, but there was no response, so he seemed to be unconscious but still breathing. His feet and arms were turning red, so maybe he got lightheaded from the heat. Glancing around, I realized Ellie was nowhere to be seen. What was going on? She was supposed to be taking a bath. I felt bad for Ken, but I figured the missing Ellie took priority, so I frantically searched all over the house. Then, going outside and around to the back of the house. Mommy. Mommy. I heard a faint voice coming from the shed. It was Ellie's voice. I immediately opened the door to the shed. There was Ellie, sitting amidst the cleaning supplies and trash we planned to throw out. Why was she in a place like this, playing hide and seek? No, that couldn't be. It might seem unusual, but our house has a side entrance to the bathroom. We used to have a large dog. It was designed that way so it would be easy to wash the dog's feet after walks. So it was entirely possible for Ellie to come to this shed alone from the bathroom. But there's no way she'd suddenly hide in the shed when she was so looking forward to taking a bath with Ken. Which means the suspicious one is,
why are you in a place like this? Did Daddy tell you to?
I instinctively hugged Ellie close. The poor thing, her small body was completely chilled from being in the freezing shed. Yeah, Daddy said to wait here before the bath. He said he'd call for me later, so I couldn't come out until then.
Why would he say something like that?
I've been keeping it a secret, but...
What?
What Ellie told me was truly horrifying. I'm ashamed that I'd been living in ignorance. And more than that, I felt hatred towards Ken. I absolutely won't forgive him. I'll make him regret it from the bottom of his heart. And so, I resolved to take everything away from Ken.
Huh? It's cold. What is this? Hey, is that you, Nancy?
Ken's voice rang out, clearly conveying his confusion. That's right. So you've woken up.
What do you mean, woken up? Nancy, you left me in the bathroom with no clothes on? What a cold-hearted wife.
Saying that, Ken opened the door and came out. Immediately after, Ken's face froze.
What? Dad? Mom?
Waiting for Ken with me were his parents-in-law. The two of them glared sternly at Ken.
Why are you two here? I'm not wearing any clothes, don't look. Towel! Towel!
Ken hurriedly grabbed a bath towel and hid his body.
Isn't there something else you should have been hiding? Huh? What are you trying to say?
Ken replied to my question with an irritated attitude. He'll only be able to act like that for now. You should have hidden this person, shouldn't you? Saying that, I dragged out the woman I had waiting in the hallway.
No! Stop!
The woman cried out. Upon seeing her, Ken's expression froze once again.
What? Why? Ken, it seems you were having a date with this woman in her bathroom while leaving Ellie in the shed. How do you know that?
Ken suddenly covered his mouth, wearing an expression that said he'd screwed up. Seeing Ken like that made me so happy, I couldn't help but laugh.
I heard everything from Ellie and this woman. No matter how much you try to hide it, Ken, it's pointless. Give it up.
At my words, Ken held his head in his hands. He must have realized he can no longer keep it hidden. What I heard from Ellie was an unbelievable story. Apparently, Ken has been repeatedly cheating with this woman, Linda, all this time. And with Ellie too. That's right. The place he was taking Ellie out to when he said he was going to play was Linda's house. No wonder he wouldn't take me along. And to Ellie. You can't tell Mommy about where we went or who we met. Ellie will get in trouble if you do. He apparently said. Because of that, Ellie didn't actually want to go to his mistress's house, but she couldn't honestly say so and had no choice but to stay quiet about it.
Using Ellie as an alibi for your affair is the worst. I'm so disappointed in you as a person. You're a disgrace to the family.
Saying that, Maria, my mother-in-law, slapped Ken hard across the face. She even hit Ken's body with a bottle of laundry detergent, but no one tried to stop her. The only one who reluctantly said,
"That's enough,"
was Linda. Everyone looked at Ken with the feeling that he deserved to be hit.
Why are you calling Mom and the others over my affair? That's low, Nancy. I don't want to be called low by someone who did something as underhanded as having an affair in the first place. Your misdeeds were just too much, so I simply wanted to let your parents, who dote on Ellie, know about it too. What's wrong with that? That's right. Don't you dare complain so high and mighty, Ken.
My father-in-law Tom yelled at Ken, agreeing with my words. As doting grandparents to their first grandchild Ellie, their hatred for Ken might exceed even mine. Tom, who was apparently a troublemaker in his youth, had a very sharp glare, and I could tell Ken was trembling in fear.
Linda, how did you get caught? I made sure you got away, didn't I?
I found out from Linda herself that Ken had invited her here. Why the hell would Ken do something so stupid as to invite his mistress to our house? You really think so too, right? You see, the story goes back to Ellie's birthday. On that day, Ken had originally made plans to meet up with Linda, it seems. He was going to bring Ellie along as usual, he said. But when I suggested a birthday party for Ellie, the plans changed completely. When Ken told Linda, "I want to cancel this time," she got angry, saying,
"Which is more important, me or your family?"
Their relationship got a bit strained from there and things stayed awkward between them for a while, apparently. Recently, Ken apologized to her and told her, "I cherish you, Linda." And as proof that Linda was more important to him than his family, he invited Linda to our house. He even said cheesy lines like,
"If my wife finds out about your existence, Linda, I'll choose you this time for sure."
He says he invited her over, but you can't really call making love for a few dozen minutes in the shower room an invitation. And to avoid suspicion even if it took a long time, he brought along not just himself, but Ellie, who loves playing in the bath. I think Ken's cowardice is showing through everywhere, but Linda was apparently still happy about it. Love is blind, as they say. And so the two of them ended up having a secret rendezvous at our house. However, Ken got too excited by the extraordinary situation of meeting his mistress in his own shower room, causing his blood pressure to rise. He got lightheaded and lost consciousness just like that. Just before losing consciousness, he somehow managed to help only Linda escape through the side door to the outside, but in her haste, Linda forgot to bring her clothes and only had a towel. She was locked out of the side door after Ken passed out, so she couldn't have him get her belongings. With nowhere to run, she hid behind our shed and was easily found by me. This wasn't supposed to happen. I'm sorry, Linda said with tears in her eyes. Ken sighed in annoyance. This is the worst, he said. What a despicable line to say at a time like this. I couldn't help but rebuke him.
Even if she's your mistress, that's no way to treat your girlfriend who's crying, is it? Whose side are you on, Nancy? The one thing I'm sure of is that I'm your enemy, Ken.
My in-laws made displeased expressions at Ken clicking his tongue. Noticing this, Ken averted his eyes in embarrassment and said,
That woman is just spouting nonsense. I'm not having an affair. What?
Linda looked at Ken with a shocked expression at his words. This was an unexpected betrayal.
That's right. This woman opened the side door on her own and took Ellie out of the shower room.
Everyone there thought it was a stretch. But Ken seems to want to somehow get through this situation with this nonsensical excuse.
She's a trespasser,
he accuses Linda.
I can't believe this. Ken, didn't you invite me over? I still have messages from you on my smartphone.
Ken cowers at Linda's words.
That's right, I confiscated Linda's smartphone, so I got to see all the exchanges between you two afterwards.
When I say that, Linda takes on a triumphant attitude.
I won't let you get away with trying to save only yourself. When I fall into hell, you're coming with me.
Saying that, Linda slapped Ken across the face. Although Ken said,
What are you doing?
He seems unable to say anything to Linda's words and bites his lip in silence. I'm sorry.
I apologize for getting into this kind of relationship with your husband.
So please, just forgive me. It seems Linda has finally decided to betray Ken. She's clearly trying to curry favor with me. Behind Linda, Ken is saying childish things like,
That's not fair, Linda.
Don't worry, Linda.
It's not like only one of you will be saved. When I send you to hell, I plan to do it with both of you together. What? They should be coming soon. What are you talking about? I'm talking about them. I don't understand.
A little while after that exchange, the doorbell of our house rang.
Excuse me, Tom. Could you please greet the person who just arrived and bring them here?
Tom heads to the front door, stunned by my words but understanding. And then a single person arrives, guided by Tom.
What?
Linda's face freezes. Surprised, aren't you? I can't help but laugh.
This is Linda's daddy. I found his contact info in Linda's smartphone, so I messaged him about the situation and invited him here.
As I introduce him with a smile.
No, that's wrong.
Ken cries out. What? I ask in response.
Why are you here, boss?
Ken is shocked and Linda turns pale. Huh? Boss? What do you mean?
Nancy, why did you call my boss here? I thought it was questionable to call her parent, but you got the wrong person. You just had to complicate things.
Thinking it couldn't be, I checked the sent message history on Linda's smartphone in my hand. I definitely sent a message to the person registered as Daddy, just as I thought. I didn't make any mistake. In other words, this person should be Linda's father, but… Meanwhile, the boss is also standing there frozen in place, his face pale.
Please tell me this isn't true, Linda.
The boss groans. Linda breaks down crying.
I'm sorry. Forgive me.
She screams. Ken is dumbfounded too.
Am I not your lover? What do you mean by Daddy?
That's… Linda is flustered and panicking, while the boss is desperately trying to get the truth out of her.
I called him here thinking he was your daddy because that's how he was registered. Was I wrong?
The boss is shocked by my question.
Daddy!
At the boss's words, Linda hangs her head. She probably can't bear to look at his face.
Did you see me not as a lover, but as a daddy? Was I just a wallet to you? That's not true. I really did love you. Then why am I registered as Daddy? I thought it was strange. Every time we met, you wanted things, and the talk of marriage never went anywhere. Listen to me. It's not like that. I don't want to hear it. I was the only one who thought we were in a serious relationship.
At first, I had no idea what was going on, but apparently, Linda and Ken had started an affair while working at the same company. Meanwhile, Linda was also dating the boss, so to speak, but basically, she was receiving financial assistance from him. The boss, who thought they were in a serious relationship, was even considering marriage, but Linda wasn't enthusiastic about it, and she always evaded the topic. Despite that, she would beg for an engagement ring, and in hindsight, there were many odd things about their relationship. It seems Linda didn't have that kind of relationship with Ken, so the one she truly liked was probably Ken. The boss was just a sugar daddy. In other words, he had been deceived by Linda. Daddy was registered in her contacts, but Mom wasn't, so I had arbitrarily assumed she was from a single-father household, but now I understood what it meant.
Did you two have fun playing with me? Boss, I had no idea you and Linda were dating. That doesn't matter. You made a fool out of me. You two better be prepared.
The boss shakes off Ken, who tries to stop him, and leaves our house. Linda and Ken both slump to the floor right there.
Looks like you might lose your job and everything else, huh? Because of who? What? What do you mean, everything else? You'll probably lose your family too, right?
Starting now.
What?
I quietly hand Ken the divorce application papers that Maria had brought for me. Please sign this. Let's get a divorce. I'll take custody of Ellie.
Why are you deciding that on your own? Why? You've got some nerve saying that. Ken, do you not understand what you've done to Ellie? You might have repeatedly done things that could traumatize her for life. There's no way I'm going to keep living with a man like that. Are you an idiot? Cut me some slack for one affair.
The moment I was about to lash out at Ken's words, Ken fell backwards with great force. Tom had kicked him.
You've still got a hot head even though you're not wearing any clothes, huh?
Tom's face was red with anger. For some reason, he's smiling with his mouth, but I can sense a murderous aura emanating from his back.
Dad, I don't want to hear your excuses.
Saying that, Tom grabs Ken's hair and slaps his face. Normally, it might seem excessive, but this time, it's probably warranted. No one showed any signs of sympathy for Ken. Probably because they all think Ken is the worst and in the wrong. And so, Ken was forced by Tom to agree to the divorce. He promised to pay compensation and child support, and without any division of assets, everything would go to me. I feel a little bad that we took everything from Ken with just Tom's fist, without any trial or anything, but considering what Ken did to Ellie, it's probably fair. He should lose everything and regret his actions from the bottom of his heart. Afterwards, Linda had to pay compensation to me and also to the boss. Usually, it's difficult to get compensation for romance scams and such, but in Linda's case, she was sloppy, and various pieces of evidence of fraud came to light. After a little investigation, we found a detailed post on her Finsta or whatever on social media, outlining a surefire method for snagging a sugar daddy. That scandal was grounds for her dismissal from the company too. Of course, Ken's misdeeds also came to light, and both of them ended up leaving the company. Ken's job was a bit unique, with strong connections in that world. Often, an incident at one company would spread as gossip to other companies. This time, Ken's scandal spread outside the company, and his job search faced difficulties. In the end, he somehow managed to change industries and find a new job, but it didn't seem to be a good fit, and it didn't last long. In his 30s, he changed jobs 4 times in a row. His resume started to look like someone who couldn't hold down a job, and finally, he couldn't pass any interviews anywhere. However, when God closes a door, he opens a window. There was one place that was willing to hire Ken, even though he had been job hopping. Unlike the corporations he had worked for before, it was a limited company food processing factory, but it should have been a blessing for Ken. But that company was notorious in the industry for being an exploitative company where many employees quit due to health issues. A god, yes, but an evil one. It's his own fault. As for me, I rented out the house we had been living in and started living with my daughter in an apartment near the station. Even though we're divorced, living in a house where such things happened is not good for one's mental health, you know? Actually, when we got divorced. Is it okay if we say goodbye to Daddy? I did ask my daughter. I had already decided on divorce based on my own selfish feelings, but I was worried that Ellie might still want her father around. But Ellie's unexpected response was, "Yay!" It seems Ellie's heart had drifted away from her father due to Ken's repeated betrayals, like being taken to his mistress's house and being neglected, forgetting promises, and not playing with her in the bath. She even made a grown-up statement like, "It was a hassle having to be considerate and play with him," which made me laugh in spite of myself. Thanks to that, it goes without saying that I was able to get divorced with a clear conscience. Right after the divorce, Ken didn't seem interested in Ellie at all, and he never said he wanted to see her or requested visitation, but maybe he got lonely as he aged and was by himself. Around the time Ellie started elementary school, he started saying more often that he wanted to meet as a family. But Ellie would scoff, "We're not family," and refuse to go. I'm definitely not trying to go along with it, but Ellie is canceling her meetings with Ken in various ways. The other day, she canceled on the day of, saying her stomach hurt. By the way, that was a lie too. Ken seems to be aware of Ellie's lies, and he's dejected, saying, "It's my fault." But he's probably still hopeful since he keeps asking for visitation. Though it seems that hope will be crushed by Ellie soon enough. Ellie says, "I don't intend to ever see him." So it looks like Ken has a tough road ahead. On the other hand, Ellie and I have built a relationship that's like parent and child, but also like friends. On our days off, we go shopping for clothes together, and Ellie picks out outfits for me, and I enjoy choosing clothes and hair accessories for Ellie too. Having this kind of fun is something you can do when you're the same-sex parent, you know? Recently, she apparently has a boy she likes, and she wants to master making delicious sweets, so I'm in the middle of teaching her how to make really tasty treats. By the way, after the divorce, I drew on my experience as a pastry chef before I got married and opened a Western-style confectionery shop. A famous chain store known for its low prices opened up in the neighborhood, and I'm struggling with rising prices and such, but whenever I see families come in and buy our cakes to celebrate special days, I feel glad I'm doing this. It makes me happy to become a flavor that will remain in someone's memories. The chain stores are a threat, but the local folks seem to favor us over the famous stores because they like our warm flavors. I'll continue making sweets without forgetting that warmth. Ellie even says things like, "Someday I'll take over Mommy's shop." I'm not getting my hopes up, but I'd be happy if that day really came. Hey, how much of Ben's inheritance am I gonna get? My husband David blurts out, his words dripping with greed. My only family, my father, had just passed away suddenly, and we had barely finished the funeral. As I was drowning in grief, David didn't offer any comfort and nonchalantly started talking about money. My dad was a famous lawyer who often appeared in the media, and his earnings must have been quite substantial. When David and I first got married, we got along well and he never showed any desire for my father's status or wealth. But within a few months, he started acting strange. He stopped doing household chores, slacked off at work causing his performance reviews to drop, and went out drinking every night only to show up hungover at the office. Eventually, he became so self-indulgent that he had no qualms about being absent from work without notice. I suppose he had grown complacent, relying on my father's money. And now that my father had passed away, he finally revealed his true colors. His attitude, trampling on my loneliness and feelings of mourning for the deceased, filled me with a sadness that made me want to scream and cry, and an anger that welled up from the depths of my stomach at the same time. Lying on the bed, I told David without even making eye contact. There is no inheritance. I'm Mom's stepchild from long ago. I'm not a real family member, so I can't inherit anything. 0. David's face instantly turned pale.
You're lying, a stepchild? What the hell? You never told me that before,
he shouted. As I calmly explained, David suddenly let out a yell that reverberated throughout the room.
You deceived me. I was expecting an inheritance knowing your dad was a famous lawyer. I made a mistake marrying a plain-looking, middle-aged woman like you. I'm divorcing you right away.
He screamed angrily in a harsh tone and smashed everything on the table onto the floor. The pair of stuffed animals, the photo frame with our wedding photos, the mirror we bought on a trip, the mementos of our time together shattered one after another with loud crashes. Was this the true feelings of the David I had loved so much, the one I had shared so many fun times with when we first met? Overwhelmed by a mix of disappointment and disillusionment, I collapsed weakly on the spot. I couldn't let David see the smile I couldn't hold back. My name is Rala. I'm 36 years old and work at a cosmetics company. My husband's name is David. He's 5 years younger than me, and we met at a foreign language school we were attending at the time. Both David and I work in sales at different companies, and we were studying languages again to keep up with the recent globalization. My father is a famous lawyer who often appears in the media, known as the go-to attorney that everyone wants to consult with. Of course, his sales and assets seem to be quite substantial. We keep our family out of the media spotlight, so my existence isn't widely known to the public, but it still gets around to those around us. The neighbors, acquaintances, friends, and people at work often said various things about my father. With my father being wealthy, many people mistakenly assumed I was financially well off too and would approach me for money. By my 20s, I was already fed up with that situation. I had a few boyfriends, but in the end, everyone was after my father's assets. As soon as we got a little closer, They would say things like wanting me to introduce them to my father or assuming he would support us if we got married. They were all counting on my father's money, and each time I broke up with them, everyone only cared about my father. No one truly saw me for who I am. David, who approached me persistently when I was emotionally unstable, always talked about foreign language lessons and everyday life. Even when I gave in to his enthusiastic invitations and went on a few dates, the topic of my father never came up, and he acted normal when we talked about each other's family. Maybe David didn't know about my father. David always seemed to genuinely enjoy talking with me. We would eat at affordable restaurants, go to theme parks together, and spend carefree days like a normal couple. I have so much fun just being with you, Rala. Seeing you smile next to me makes me feel happy. I really respect how you never slack off in your work, hobbies, or self-improvement. David said to me as we ate delivery pizza together in his room. I want to keep enjoying lots of things together with you. If it's okay, will you be my girlfriend? After slowly opening up to David through our dates, his words made my heart feel warm. This person truly sees me for who I am. With him, we can support each other in life. Tears welled up in my eyes and the pizza in my mouth suddenly tasted salty, yet somehow sweet. Thank you. I'm so happy when I'm with you too, David. I'm looking forward to our future together, I replied. David lovingly supported my back as tears streamed down my face. He never counted on my money to take me to fancy restaurants or eagerly wanted to visit my family's house as if appraising it. The ordinary happiness of eating simple home-cooked meals or delivery pizza in our small rooms had finally come to me too. Filled with a sense of security, I couldn't help but hug David. And so, we continued dating smoothly, but even during that time, David never showed any interest in my family's house. After about 3 years of a normal relationship, we decided to get engaged. If we were going to get married, we had to introduce each other to our parents. I was quite nervous about inviting David to my family's house. Since David didn't seem to know about my father, I was a little scared that he might be surprised and run away. When my father appeared and introduced himself to us as we waited in the living room, David was utterly shocked. Wait, are you the lawyer who's on TV every week, the one everyone wants to consult with? David asked in astonishment. My father let out a hearty laugh at David's surprised reaction. Yes, I am that lawyer. You're the first person to date my daughter and make it this far without knowing. I'm quite surprised myself, he said, still chuckling. David apologetically expressed his regret to my father, who was still laughing after saying that. I'm sorry. I was being absent-minded. I didn't properly ask Rala either. The truth is, I haven't been taking her to nice places for our dates. I've been very rude to both Rala and you. I'm terribly sorry. David continued to apologize. My father, still smiling, said to him, It's all right. You're marrying my daughter, not me. My daughter's life is her own. You don't need to worry about me at all. The best thing is for you two to support each other in a life where you can both feel happiness. My father's demeanor was calm yet dignified, making us feel the depth of his life experience and character as a lawyer who had handled various difficult cases and also worked extensively in the media. Moved by my father's words, David straightened his back, his eyes shining. Yes. I may never be able to achieve as much as you. And I may be younger and unreliable, but I'll do my best to make Rala happy. My father warmly watched over us. A few months later, we were able to hold our wedding ceremony and officially register our marriage without any issues. Some relatives remarked that the scale of the wedding was small for the daughter of a famous lawyer, but it was based on my and David's wish to have a lovely ceremony with just close family. We moved into an apartment to live together and began our married life as a couple. Even after getting married, we got along well and lived frugally together. To save money, we both quit the foreign language school, but instead, I started having more opportunities to interact with overseas clients at work, and now I'm acquiring foreign languages through practical experience. David seemed to end up staying the same, but he appeared to be working hard at his sales job as he always had. What kind of life would we lead together from now on? I wanted to travel together, and someday, I wanted to have children. I wanted us to steadily walk together towards a happy future. That's what I thought. But was I the only one who felt that way? A few months after our marriage, gradual changes started to appear in David's attitude. At first, he would help with household chores in the evenings and on days off, but recently, he won't even take care of himself, let alone do chores. Clothes left strewn about, dishes he ate from abandoned on the table. When he noticed we were out of daily necessities, he used to take the initiative to go buy them, but lately, he just roughly orders me around, saying things like, "We're out of milk." And what made me doubt my eyes the most was how his spending had become more extravagant. Before, he would invest in himself by going to foreign language school, but he wasn't the type to splurge on food or entertainment. Just as he had told my father, when we went out, he often chose affordable restaurants. That's why I was especially happy when he splurged a little for our anniversary. But now, even when it's not our anniversary, he casually buys expensive brand name watches and nonchalantly makes reservations at 3-star restaurants I've never even been to, saying he's going out drinking with friends. It was so egregious that I asked him, "I understand wanting to splurge, but is our money situation okay?" He brushed me off, saying things like, "I'm married now, so I have to do at least this much to keep up appearances." Even when I cautioned him, "We need to increase our savings for when we have children in the future, so it's problematic if you splurge on your own too much," he responded irresponsibly with, "It'll be fine. We'll manage somehow." Around the time I was fed up with David's carelessness, the bonus season arrived. There wasn't a big change in my bonus, and if anything, it had gone up a little, perhaps because my daily efforts were recognized. The problem was with David, the numbers on his bonus statement had decreased by a digit. Even David looked a bit dissatisfied about this, and when I asked, "It's been reduced to about 1/3 of last time," he said. I hadn't heard anything about the performance of David's company or industry significantly dropping. It was clear that the assessment was due to issues with David himself. "Come to think of it, you've been going out drinking late into the night a lot recently. There were times when you went to work hungover from drinking too much, and you overslept enough to be late to the office a few times, right? Could it be that those things piled up and affected your work?" I asked, choosing my words a bit carefully. It seemed that David's work ethic had become sloppy since we got married. From his daily attitude, his stance towards work naturally became apparent. I couldn't believe that David, who was constantly playing around and being late, could produce results at his company. "Is that so? It seems like the company is having a tough time too. Won't the numbers go back to what they were before next time?" David spoke as if it was someone else's problem, even though I was so worried. There was no sense at all that he would try to change his lifestyle, and despite his bonus being reduced so much, he didn't seem to have any intention of making up for it. Then one day, less than a few weeks after that incident, David was absent from work without notice. As usual, he had been out drinking late the night before, and must have come home in the middle of the night while I was fast asleep. No matter how many times I tried to wake him up the next morning, he wouldn't get up. "I don't care anymore," I said, leaving him behind as I headed to my own company. But in the end, David never woke up on his own and didn't show up at work after that. Moreover, it seemed he had continued sleeping without even contacting his company. When I came home and saw David still sleeping in the same state as that morning, I couldn't believe my eyes.
Don't tell me you seriously skipped work without notice?
I couldn't help raising my voice at his behavior, which was far too irresponsible for both a husband and a working adult. I couldn't wake up.
The company called, so I took the day off.
David muttered. Unbelievable. His workplace had gone out of their way to contact him, worried when he didn't show up at the scheduled time. He inconvenienced his company, didn't do his job, and on top of that, showed no sign of remorse. I felt a sense of despair towards David, who had turned into a good-for-nothing completely different from the man I married.
Do you understand what you've done? Your performance reviews are dropping, you're going to work sleep-deprived and hungover every day, and now you're skipping without notice? What are you going to do if you get fired over this?
I couldn't help crying out, deeply concerned about David's life and our future together. The next words out of David's mouth left me speechless.
Then we can just borrow money from Ben.
In that instant, everything went dark before my eyes. Since when did this man start counting on my father's wealth? I wondered in disbelief. He had promised my father that he would find happiness with me while supporting each other. He used to say he was happy just being with me and enjoyed our simple life together. I felt like a fool for believing I could find happiness with David. Now, in the end, David was only with me for the money too. He was no different from all the others in my past. Are human beings creatures who inevitably become blinded by wealth? Then was it a mistake to introduce him to my father before the wedding? Disappointment, regret, disillusionment, sadness, various emotions swirled within me. If things continue this way, I might have to consider divorce, I realized grimly. Even after that, David didn't change his attitude. Although he stopped skipping work without notice after apparently receiving a stern warning from his company, he never quit his flashy nighttime entertainment or wasteful spending. When he started showing an unbelievable level of frivolous spending, like impulsively buying expensive brand-name shoes and bags without much thought, I even felt a sense of dread thinking about what would become of David in the future. Anxious about my own life, several months ended up passing just like that. And then one day, my father suddenly passed away. It wasn't an accident or incident, but a sudden death from illness. Of course, my father's business associates and the media made a huge commotion, and those around him suddenly became very busy. Having lost my mother long ago and with no siblings, my father was my only family. Until the funeral was over, I was far too busy to even have time to cry, but when everything was finally done, a sense of loss and sadness washed over me. My father, who had single-handedly raised me while juggling his main job and media work, was always calm, wise, and the object of my utmost respect. Even when I felt like giving up during my college entrance exams or job hunting, my father's attitude of never shying away from effort and learning in anything encouraged me and helped me overcome those challenges. He was only 66 years old, far too young to pass away. As I was grieving alone in my room, David barged in without even knocking. I knew that David had barely helped with the funeral arrangements, idly fiddling with his smartphone in a corner the whole time while I was busy handling all the various preparations and correspondence. Having already given up on David after everything that had happened, I didn't even feel like scolding him in that moment. As I crouched by the bed, clinging to it and crying, David stood over me without even bothering to crouch down and meet my eyes.
"Hey, how much inheritance is there?"
he asked. It all comes down to money in the end, I thought, disgusted. As I remained silent, not even bothering to respond to his words, David stepped closer and raised his voice. How much is there?
With how much he earned, there must be a ton of money left, right? You're his only living relative, so you'll get the inheritance, yeah?
He was grinning repulsively, even though his wife's father had just passed away. It seemed that now that my father was gone, David thought he had become a multimillionaire overnight. Lazing around without working while splurging extravagantly, that self-indulgent lifestyle dangled right in front of him, and his face looked so vulgar, as if he was about to start drooling. I even felt a sense of revulsion. Lying on the bed, I told David without even making eye contact.
There is no inheritance.
David immediately shouted.
That's impossible! He died suddenly, so there's no way he used it all up. That's not it. I'm the stepchild of my long-deceased mother. I'm not his real family, so I can't inherit anything.
It's zero. Just as I told David now, I have no blood relation to the father I respected so much. This was part of the reason why my father never revealed his family to the media.
You're lying, a stepchild? What the hell? You never told me that before, he shouted. It's true that he raised me until I became an adult and that we cherished each other, and since Mom passed away long ago, I just thought there was no need to specifically mention it.
I had nothing more to say to David. Instead of telling him to get out, I sighed. Suddenly, David let out a yell loud enough to echo throughout the room.
You deceived me! Why do you think I've been sucking up to Ben all this time? Give me back these past few years!
What? For a moment, I thought my heart would stop. What did he just say? Before I could even ask, David flew into a rage and smashed everything on the table onto the floor. The pair of stuffed animals, the photo frame holding our wedding photos, the mirror we bought on a trip, the mementos of our time together shattered one after another with loud crashes.
You're an idiot, so you probably thought I was some prince who fell for you purely without knowing about Ben, right? It was all an act. There was someone in the same class as me at the foreign language school who recognized your face right away and secretly told me everything. They said there must be a ton of guys coming after you for Ben's money, so if I pretended not to know and put on a pure love act, you'd fall for it immediately.
I couldn't believe it. Unlike school or work, your identity isn't revealed at hobby classes, so I had let my guard down. Since no one had ever mentioned anything about me in the foreign language class, I truly believed that David had come to like me without knowing about my father. David had just accused me of deceiving him, but I was the one who had been deceived. David clicked his tongue loudly.
What are you gonna do about this? You've ruined my whole life plan. I desperately acted like a good guy for 3 years thinking I'd get my hands on that inheritance. Otherwise, who'd bother with a plain-looking, middle-aged woman like you?
As soon as he revealed his true colors, he started saying whatever he wanted. My disappointment had already reached its limit, and I didn't have the energy to strongly argue back. I just felt my heart grow cold.
I was planning to divorce you as soon as the inheritance came through without a hitch. I've been seeing someone for about a year now, so I was gonna marry her and build a nice house with that money to let her live in luxury.
After exposing his lies to me, he even confessed to cheating. I couldn't help but react to this. I raised my face, widened my eyes, and stared intently at David.
What did you just say? A year ago? Wasn't that around the time we decided to get married?
That's right. It was just about a year ago that I had accepted David's proposal and gone to report it to my father.
Don't tell me you cheated because our marriage was decided?
That's right.
If I'm gonna be with someone, of course I want a young, pretty girl. There was someone I'd had my eye on for a while. But cute girls cost money, you know? I couldn't afford to date her on my salary. So I somehow managed to secure this marriage with you.
What a perfect plan. David and his petty desires had been using both me and my father all along. When David went out drinking with his friends and colleagues, was he actually spending most of that time on dates with his mistress? My heart pounded loudly with anger. My fingertips grew hot and started to tremble.
This was a real waste. If you don't have money, I have no use for you. I'm divorcing you right away.
David spat out. I quietly told him, facing his direction.
Of course. I'd refuse to be with someone who deceived us the whole time and even cheated. Let's get divorced quickly. And since you cheated, I'll be seeking compensation too.
Perhaps triggered by the mention of monetary compensation, David, who had seemed to calm down after saying his piece, began to fly into a rage again.
Compensation? I should be the one getting that from you. I'm the one who was deceived this whole time. And do you even have any proof of cheating to show a lawyer? Photos? Recordings? You don't have anything, do you?
David taunted. Even as I felt my anger about to explode from his provocation, I tried my best to speak calmly.
You're right. It would be difficult to get compensation without evidence. Then I won't seek compensation. There's no inheritance, so we can't divide assets either. Just promise that from now on, you won't have anything to do with me or my family. That's enough.
David then said with emotionless eyes.
Yeah, that's fine. I don't ever want to be involved with you again either.
With just those words, he left the room, deliberately slamming the door hard to make a loud noise as he went. A few days later, after getting David to sign the divorce papers and the written oath he had mentioned the day before about never involving himself with me again, we got divorced. Having lost both my father and David in a matter of days, I returned to my family home feeling empty inside. My father's presence still lingered in the room he had been living in until recently, and I cried there once more. After that, I returned to work and began to get used to living alone in my family home, and a peaceful life gradually started to come back. Then, about 2 weeks later, my smartphone started ringing incessantly all day long. At work, I put it on silent mode and kept it in my locker to avoid disturbing others, but it was the same situation at home, so it was unbearably disruptive to my life. The caller was David every time. I had ignored it for several days, but it was so persistent that I decided to answer just once. If I listened to what he had to say one time, these persistent calls would probably stop. The moment I pressed the call button, David started yelling in a harsh tone from the other end of the line.
You! How dare you lie to me back then? There was an inheritance after all, wasn't there? Why didn't you give it to me?
His shouting was so unpleasant that I reflexively pulled the receiver away from my ear. The TV in my room happened to be showing the news, and I watched it. It was a story about how the recently deceased father's relatives had donated his sizable estate entirely to non-profit organizations. David had probably seen this news, learned that there actually was an inheritance, and was now in a rage. There was actually a small lie in the story about not having an inheritance I could inherit due to lack of blood relation. It was true that I was my mother's child from a previous marriage and had no blood relation to my father, but when my parents remarried, I was still in elementary school and they had legally adopted me. And my father, a popular lawyer, had prepared a will just in case something happened, which stated that I would inherit his entire estate. Of course, since a lawyer had drawn it up, it was legally airtight. When my father passed away, David was already living a lazy life of wastefulness. So I had kept quiet, thinking that if I revealed the existence of the inheritance, he would spend it all without working.
And what the hell is up with that amount? $2 million? With that money, you'd never have to worry about living expenses again. Why did you keep quiet about it? You idiot!
Since David and I were already divorced and he was now a stranger, there was no way for him to get his hands on my family's money. David seemed to have his blood boiling from the shock and frustration of losing his chance to get his hands on a large sum of money.
That's exactly what I'm talking about. I don't want to give even a single cent to someone who obsesses over other people's money despite not even working hard himself,
I said firmly. David let out a pathetic sound from the other end of the line.
Did you really donate it all? Didn't you keep even a little for yourself?
I was actually impressed by how bad he was at giving up as I answered.
I really donated the entire amount, not even a cent left. Dad's money is no longer in our possession.
Then I heard a blatant tongue click from the other end of the receiver.
You really are an idiot. Why the hell would you donate it? If you had kept it for yourself, you could have had a good life. I made the right call divorcing a stupid woman like you.
With those parting words, David hung up the phone unilaterally. Finally feeling calm, I blocked David's number. After that, David apparently went out drinking every day, shocked that the inheritance he was counting on from his ex-wife's father was completely gone. Of course, his work attitude and performance at the company worsened even further. Moreover, the fact that he had married his ex-wife for the inheritance and divorced her as soon as her father passed away spread throughout the company, further lowering people's opinion of his character. Meanwhile, when I tried using social media to look for David's mistress, I quickly found her personal account. It seemed David had been quite generous with her, counting on my father's inheritance, but now that it was all gone, he couldn't even put on a good face for her anymore.
The guy I was dating got divorced, but lately he keeps saying he has no money, so the presents and dinners have completely stopped. I was dating him because I thought he'd let me live in luxury, but now I'm thinking of breaking up.
Read a post by his mistress. Seeing that, I held my aching head. If David was after my father's money, it seemed his mistress was after David's money. They were all just a bunch of greedy, classless jerks. I closed that page with a straight face, deciding never to look at it again. About 3 weeks after my last phone call with David, an unexpected visitor came to my company one day. An employee in charge of the reception called for me with a troubled look, so I followed them to the hallway where David was waiting, looking much more haggard than before. "What are you thinking, coming to my workplace?" I asked. David looked at me with a fawning gaze, laughing.
I was thinking after that. When my bonus went down, yours went up, right? So even if you don't have Ben's inheritance, you must have your own savings, yeah?
I was shocked, never expecting him to bring up my money.
I've been taking out loans for shopping and using my card for bar tabs, so now my debt has piled up. At this rate, it's going to affect my life. I want you to help me out a little. Come on, please?
David pleaded. Just when I thought he had finally given up on my father's inheritance, now he was coming to demand my savings. I felt so dizzy from his outrageous nerve that I nearly collapsed on the spot.
Of course not,
I declared.
Every time you look at someone, it's money, money, money. I'm so sick of it. If you want money that badly, then work hard, save up, and make your own money.
Don't make such a scary face. You're really not cute at all.
Want me to tell you how much debt I'm in?
$20,000.
Even the woman I was going to marry dumped me recently, saying I'm too stingy. I've hit rock bottom.
Can't you help me out a little? David persisted with a pathetic look on his face. Having lost both money and women, his sulking figure was simply pathetic and ugly.
You selfishly counted on my family and racked up debt on your own, right? Deal with it yourself. You're really being a nuisance, so leave right now.
Hearing our raised voices, employees and security guards started gathering around us. Of course, the employees close to me knew about my father and had been invited to the wedding, so they recognized David's face. My boss, who had rushed over, had the security guards escort David out, resolving the situation peacefully for the moment. Afterwards, he talked with me at length and said he would make sure David couldn't get into the company again in the future. Then my boss got angry at David, saying,
I can't stand seeing someone who works so humbly and diligently suffering because of a nasty ex-husband.
While sympathizing with me. He even praised my sincere and competent work ethic and told me he would give me a good assessment next time. After that, David's lifestyle completely fell apart. He started being late and skipping work without notice repeatedly until he was finally fired from his company. Of course, David had no savings, so he quickly became unable to pay rent and living expenses. He was kicked out of his home and apparently ended up on the streets. Drinking too much, his health deteriorated and his appearance worsened. Of course, it was impossible for David to find another job as a full-time employee. He's somehow working a live-in part-time job and slowly paying off his debts with his meager wages. For years, he deceived one woman and flew into a rage when things didn't go his way. He couldn't manage himself properly at all, going with the easy flow and continuing to indulge himself. Such a self-centered and immature man is now being forced to endure a constricted lifestyle. Actually, there was still something I was hiding from David. The apartment that belonged to my father, where I'm living now, is in a prime location in the city and has considerable asset value. After living here for a while, I'm considering either finding a new home or selling this apartment if I ever find a new partner. And it's not a lie that I donated the inheritance, but it wasn't the entire amount as I told David. The will stated that I could use it as I liked, but that I should use a little for myself. My father seemed to have seen through the fact that I, who had long been interested in activities to save children around the world, would donate to organizations. I won't betray my precious father. That's why I decided to keep a little for myself, as per my father's will. $500,000, which is 1/4 of the inheritance, is in my account now. Of course, I won't use it for brand name goods to show off or for valueless entertainment. I want to use it carefully for my own future.
Break your promise and you're dead meat. Don't even think about running away from here.
The dirty old man grabbed Rebecca's arm, trying to drag her out of the car. I desperately pulled Rebecca's hand, resisting with all my might. I had to shut the car door, fast. We needed to escape this town, now. In no time, I heard Melissa and Raymond's voices too.
Rebecca, wait! Do you have any idea what's gonna happen to us because of you?
The three adults going berserk on the dark streets, it was nothing short of insanity. In this backwoods town with no streetlights, I kept running away from these lunatics, together with Rebecca. How on earth did things turn into such a blood-curdling, horrific nightmare? I had come back home after getting news of Rebecca's wedding from Mom, supposedly to celebrate. My name is Jessica. It's been over 8 years since I left my rural family home to live on my own, and I'm now 27. Currently I work in sales at a pharmaceutical company in Los Angeles. I'm single, but still want to focus on my career for now. Selling new drugs developed by our company to various medical schools and hospitals is grueling work, but it gives me a greater sense of fulfillment than anything else. Pharmaceutical companies and doctors joining hands to save as many patients' lives as possible, there's no greater joy. I moved out of my parents' place right after graduating high school, at the same time as I entered university in LA. I paid for everything myself, including tuition and living expenses. While in college, I juggled multiple part-time jobs. Even before that, back in high school, I had desperately saved up money from part-time work. I was determined not to rely on my parents at all. The biggest reason I wanted to get away from home was my dad. He was always drunk whenever I saw him, wasting money on gambling. He was the farthest thing from a father I could respect. If I was in the same room as Plaster Dad, he'd start harassing me, while Mom just went along with whatever he said. Our family business was farming, and with things the way they were, money was always tight. I decided I needed to take my life into my own hands as soon as possible. The only one I worried about was my one and only sister, Rebecca. Rebecca had a timid personality and got along better with our parents than I did. She's already 32 now, but forget getting married, she hasn't even become independent with a job, just helping out on the family farm. I have unpleasant memories of drunken dad badmouthing Rebecca, saying,
Rebecca's got no street smarts. If she went out to Los Angeles, she'd just get suckered by some sleazebag and be in for a world of pain.
If you ask me, Rebecca may be a bit spacey, but she's a beautiful woman with porcelain white skin and great at housework too. Wasting away in a house like this, she was too good for them. Plus, she was always so kind, sticking by my side no matter what. I adored Rebecca. Rebecca knew the state of our household well, so when I was moving out, I invited her to come with me. You can look for a job after we get to LA. I'll work hard at my part-time gigs too. The two of us can scrape by somehow. But Rebecca just gave me a troubled smile and shook her head.
I'm the oldest daughter, so I'm going to stay here and look after Dad and Mom. I need to help out if we're going to keep the farm going.
That's got nothing to do with this. We're both adults. There are tons of families where all the siblings are independent. If you're gonna say you have to live with Dad because you're the oldest, then I won't move to LA either.
No.
When I emotionally objected to Rebecca's unreasonable claim, she stated clearly to me,
You go. You worked so hard to save up money, didn't you? Besides, it's not just out of obligation. I want to stay here because I'm truly worried about this house and Mom.
Her big eyes stared straight into me. There was an unyielding strength in those eyes. Overwhelmed by her intensity, I ended up moving to the city by myself, though part of my heart remained. After that, my college life went smoothly. Balancing my studies with multiple part-time jobs made for a harsh lifestyle, but I was young and had stamina. I also had a fierce determination not to rely on my parents no matter what, so I managed to overcome it all somehow. My constant efforts in the face of adversity were recognized, and I secured a position at a major pharmaceutical company. The training and work after joining the company were even tougher than student life, but I enjoyed gaining business knowledge. And the dream that I would one day be helping to protect people's lives and health fired me up. More than anything, it was Rebecca who became my emotional pillar. Even after leaving home, I kept in touch with Rebecca through messages and phone calls. Some days she would care about my health, saying, Don't overdo it and ruin your health, okay? And on other days she would praise me, saying,
Jessica, you're working so hard. You look so vibrant these days.
Each time, a warmth would spread through my heart, and I'd feel inspired to work even harder for Rebecca's sake. However, when I'd ask her,
So how are things on your end?
She'd be kind of vague, like, Dad and Mom are the same as always. Or, Our profits have gone down but we're getting by somehow. Even if I'd get worried and try to ask for more details about the situation, she'd just brush it off with, Nothing's changed since you were here, Jessica. In reality, I never heard anything about Rebecca or our parents getting into any big accidents or anything, so I just told Rebecca,
Let me know anytime if something happens. Let me know anytime if something happens.
And then, before I knew it, I was 27. That day too, I got home late at night after entertaining clients. Keeping disagreeable doctors in a good mood for hours on end is extremely tiring, but I can manage it if I just think of it as part of the job, for the sake of my performance. As I tried to recharge myself with those thoughts, I checked my apartment mailbox and saw something rare inside. It was a letter from an individual, and looking at the sender, it was from Mom. After moving out, I had stayed in contact with Rebecca, but I hadn't communicated with anyone else at all, not Dad of course, but neither with Mom. They never reached out, and I never called or sent a single letter either. Now this sudden letter from Mom. What in the world could it be about? Still reeling from the surprise and unease, I entered my apartment and read it, exhausted. Reading the contents, I couldn't believe it. Apparently Rebecca was getting married. Huh? I hadn't heard a thing about this. Rebecca and I frequently kept in touch with each other. Yet not once had she breathed a word about a boyfriend, much less marriage. Why was I hearing about it from Mom like this, and not from Rebecca herself? A feeling I couldn't accept spread through my chest. The rest of the letter said that, for the wedding, they were holding a family meeting and I should come back home for it. Finishing the letter, I let out a sigh. Going back to my family home meant going to the house where Dad lived. The area my parents' house is in is truly the boonies, with houses really far apart, surrounded by expanses of farmland and woods. It's not even a town, it's designated a village. If I went back there, I'd have virtually no distractions. It's suffocating, almost like being trapped. Honestly, I wasn't eager to go. But if the news about Rebecca getting married was true, nothing could make me happier. I had thought Rebecca would end up taking care of Dad and Mom her entire life at this rate. If she had met a great guy, fallen in love, and decided to get married, nothing could make me happier. I wanted to meet her partner too, and of course I wanted to see Rebecca. And I wanted to congratulate her on the wedding. The next day, I wrote back to Mom saying I would attend the family meeting, and took paid leave on the appointed day. Then a few weeks passed, and it was the day of the meeting. I rode Amtrak for 7 hours to get to the city where my family home was, then planned to drive a rental car from there. The family meeting was also meant to be a dinner, so the sky was slowly turning to dusk. Away from the din of the city, in a quiet landscape devoid of neon signs or crowds of people, the sky was gradually dyed a deep red. It had been the norm when I was a kid, but coming back after 8 years, it seemed strangely surreal. I managed to arrive at my parents' house without getting lost. It was a dilapidated wooden house, visibly damaged here and there on the walls and roof even from a distance. I could tell the yard, overgrown with weeds, had hardly been tended to. The house was a mess, despite Rebecca's best efforts to keep it clean and tidy. She was overwhelmed with the responsibilities, and it showed. As I stepped inside, memories of my troubled childhood came flooding back, trapped within these walls. It left a bitter taste in my mouth. There was no guest parking, so I had to leave my rental car a short distance away and walk the rest of the way to the house. By then, the sky had darkened considerably. Deep navy blue blended with the remnants of a purple sunset, creating a stunning gradient. The vast expanse of the sky and the crisp air made the first few stars visible. A few crows cawed ominously, their voices echoing through the stillness. With a mixture of nostalgia and resentment, I approached the house's grimy door. That's when I heard it. The faint rustling of grass. Startled, I spun around to find Rebecca standing there, her face tense and uncharacteristic of someone about to attend a family meeting. Despite the years apart, Rebecca was still breathtakingly beautiful. My beloved sister, right there in front of me. It was my favorite Rebecca. But this was no joyful reunion.
Rebecca.
Shoo. She raised her eyebrows and held a finger to her lips as I started to speak. Confused, I stood there dumbfounded as Rebecca lowered her voice.
Why did you come back? What?
Wasn't it obvious? I was there to celebrate her wedding. Yet instead of welcoming me, she seemed angry, even upset, at my return.
I thought there was a family meeting. Never mind that, we're leaving.
Cutting me off, Rebecca grabbed my arm firmly. She dragged me along as she ran, giving me no choice but to follow. None of this made sense. But it was clear that this was no simple family meeting. The situation was far more complicated. Rebecca led me to one of the few bus stops in the village. She pulled me behind a small shelter that doubled as a waiting area.
Hey, what's going on? I thought we were having a family meeting tonight about your wedding.
I whispered. Out of breath, Rebecca hung her head in silence. Then, we heard footsteps approaching. It was rare for anyone to be out walking at night in this village. It was easy to tell there was only one person coming. Rebecca shielded me, hiding me behind the wall as she peeked out to check the alley.
Mom!
Rebecca's face turned pale in an instant. Through a gap in her arms, I caught a glimpse of Mom in the alley. In the years I'd been away, Mom seemed to have aged a bit. But even more shocking was that her expression was twisted as if to say it was the very face of a demon. There was still some distance, but it was clear that Melissa was calling out Rebecca's name. Rebecca turned to me and said in a strong tone,
"Get away from here right now. And go back to Los Angeles."
"Why? Hey, what's going on?" As if to say there was no time to explain, Rebecca quickly shook her head.
"Make sure Mom doesn't find you. Dad too. Make sure no one you know finds you. Run away from here as soon as possible."
Overwhelmed by Rebecca's intensity, I nodded. "Okay. But what about you?"
"I'll meet up with Mom and then go back home." "What, you mean?"
If Rebecca meets Mom. If Rebecca goes back home. What will happen, I wonder? I don't know anything. But my instincts told me I couldn't let Rebecca go home like this.
"Rebecca, this way."
This time, I pulled Rebecca's hand.
"This is so weird. Mom's acting strange too, and this situation is all messed up. And you say you're getting married, but you don't look happy at all."
"Jessica." Rebecca lowered her eyebrows sadly, still entrusting one hand to me.
"I can't return you like this. There's still time now. Let's just run away like this. Let's go to Los Angeles together."
"But..."
"Hurry."
While Rebecca hesitated, Mom was getting closer. I pulled Rebecca's hand even harder. Whether it was guilt towards her family, or a sense of relief from being freed from the current bizarre situation, Rebecca stared at me with tears in her eyes and gave a small nod.
"Let's go."
We held hands and ran with all our might. Our destination was the rental car I had arrived in. The village was completely steeped in night, and the road with hardly any streetlights had poor visibility. Although we almost stumbled on pebbles along the way, we ran desperately. Rebecca didn't let go of my hand. Soon, we arrived near the car I had come in. As I was inserting the car key, Rebecca suddenly let out a scream beside me. I turned around involuntarily. In the distance, mountains stood in a row, and in the pitch-black scenery with only fields around, I faintly saw the shadow of something. Was it a monkey or an animal? Or was it something else, something living that we shouldn't see? Wrinkled skin, hair growing chaotically from the head. Underneath, something like eyes shone sharply. I mustn't get near this thing. I got goosebumps involuntarily. Before even considering who it was, I felt a physiological disgust.
"Get in the car, quick!"
Rebecca shouted in a scream-like voice. That voice was much more tragic and tinged with madness than when she saw Mom. With my hands trembling from fear and anxiety, I finally managed to open the car door. Meanwhile, the figure lurking in the darkness was approaching. I quickly opened the passenger door to get Rebecca in. The person approaching behind Rebecca was an old man. His wrinkled face and overgrown hair looked unsanitary at a glance, while the tacky gold accessories around his neck and wrists reflected the car's headlights. Who was this old man? Was there such a person in this village? There was no time to think. The old man eerily extended his black arm from behind Rebecca and forcefully grabbed her arm, just as she was about to slide into the passenger seat.
"Eek!"
Rebecca's scream echoed. The old man was trying to forcibly drag Rebecca out of the car.
"Where are you running to?"
The old man groaned in a low, hoarse, beastly voice. Rebecca seemed about to slide off the car seat. I immediately jumped out from the driver's seat to the door on the opposite side.
"Let go! Let her go!"
I grabbed the old man's hand that was holding Rebecca from above. With all my strength, I dug my nails in and pried the old man's palm and fingers off Rebecca's arm. Physical strength is vital in sales. And from routinely carrying large amounts of documents, I have a fair amount of strength. While doing so, I stuck out one leg and kicked the old man's foot. The old man stubbornly twisted his body, trying to pull Rebecca closer.
"Trying to run away, you ungrateful child. Don't think you can escape from here."
The old man shouted such things as he grappled with us. After such a brief battle, my strength combined with Rebecca's resistance, and we managed to pry Rebecca from the old man's grip. Just before he changed his stance to grab Rebecca again, I barely managed to close the passenger door. Before he could circle around, I returned to the driver's seat and quickly started the car.
"Don't break your promise. You stupid woman."
I heard the old man's shouting voice from behind. And from somewhere, catching up, I even heard Mom's voice, and then Dad's.
Rebecca, wait!
Do you have any idea what will happen to us because of you? The sight of the three adults going berserk on the night road was nothing but abnormal. And from the situation, it was clear that the old man and our parents were in cahoots. Rebecca kept her head down. Just go. And muttered in a voice that seemed to fade away. That was my intention from the start, so I nodded and pressed hard on the accelerator. As we started to drive, we both let out a big sigh of relief and fatigue. Like a suspenseful drama, I was dumbfounded for a while as I drove. Even with Dad, I half gave up on having a perfectly amicable meal, but I never dreamed it would turn out this crazy. After driving for a while, we arrived at a place where commercial facilities were starting to come into view. Still much less bustling than the city, the lights of convenience stores and commercial facilities on either side considerably reassured me. My marriage was forcibly decided. Rebecca, who had been quietly crying in the passenger seat until then, suddenly spoke. As I suspected, it wasn't her own will after all. Otherwise, she wouldn't have looked so distraught before her wedding. What on earth happened? I prompted Rebecca to continue.
The man who tried to grab me in front of the car, he's one of our family's creditors, she revealed.
We're in debt? My eyes widened in shock as I turned to face Rebecca. I quickly reminded myself not to neglect safe driving.
I'm so ashamed and saddened that this happened under my watch. You remember how bad Dad's drinking and gambling got even when you were still at home?
Yeah, that's why I moved out. I wanted to take you with me, Rebecca. She smiled faintly and said, "Thank you for that, by the way."
After you left, no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't get him to stop. Every time he drank, he'd rant about things he hated, hit Mom, and I desperately tried to stop him. It was a vicious cycle. I tried to get him interested in other hobbies, inviting him to watch movies or cook together, but nothing worked. If anything, his habits only got worse. But we're just farmers. It's not like we make a lot of money. Eventually, we couldn't make ends meet anymore. That's when he turned to borrowing money.
I can't believe it! Drinking himself into a rage, squandering precious living expenses on gambling in an instant. I couldn't imagine how painful it must have been for her to witness Dad's conduct over these past 8 years. My chest ached with a wrenching mix of pity and remorse.
He'd buy massive amounts of alcohol with the borrowed cash, screaming that he'd win it all back gambling the next day. But of course that never happened, and the debts just kept piling up.
I don't know if I should ask, but how much does he owe now?
Around $70,000.
$70,000? I cried out so loudly, I thought the car windows might shatter. How much money did he have to burn through for it to reach that astronomical sum? Faced with such an unimaginable debt, my hands shook on the steering wheel.
I couldn't take it anymore. We had no way to pay it back, so Mom and I went directly to the creditor to beg for mercy. To that Kingston guy from earlier. We pleaded with him, "We'll take full responsibility for repaying the principal Dad borrowed, so could you please forgive at least the interest?" And then,
Rebecca fell silent after saying this much, trembling slightly.
"You don't have to force yourself if you don't want to talk about it."
"No, I'm okay."
So then, he said, "If you marry my grandson, I'll cut the interest in half." That's how my marriage was decided.
No way! You've got to be kidding me!
Dad was more than happy to accept those terms, even though it didn't mean he'd have any more money to spend himself. And to think he'd offer up me, his own daughter, so easily to an unwanted marriage. It really hurt to realize I was just property to him.
Rebecca went on to say that Mom just went along with whatever Dad said, so she didn't oppose it either.
There's more. I really don't want to say this, but Kingston the creditor then said, "You've got a sister in Los Angeles too, right? Hand her over as well, and I'll waive the interest completely."
As Rebecca finished recounting her story, she sobbed, tears rolling down her face. A chill ran down my spine. It seems he had intended to lure both Rebecca and myself into his household from the start, deliberately inflating the debt to gain leverage in negotiations. Trading your daughters for money, like some horrific custom from decades past, I couldn't believe this was happening to my own family. Overwhelmed by the terror of it all, I had to pull over onto the road shoulder. Now that my hands were free, I embraced Rebecca's shoulders in the passenger seat.
Rebecca, I'm so sorry you had to go through that.
No, I'm the one who should apologize for letting things get this bad, for not being able to stop Dad, for getting you dragged into this too. I'm so sorry. There amidst the streets still tinged with a rural atmosphere, we two sisters held each other and cried freely. I couldn't imagine how painful, lonely, and hopeless her days must have been. I wondered why I couldn't have helped her sooner. Things got so bad, I considered running away. But he threatened me, saying if you try to escape, I'll hunt down your sister and drag her back here. That's why I couldn't say anything about this the last time we spoke on the phone. I'm sorry. Rebecca, you've been shouldering this burden all alone. It must have been so hard. But it's going to be okay now. I'm here for you. We'll get through this together. After crying together for a while longer, we got back in the car and hit the road again. Since we had left the village early, we were able to catch the overnight train. With Rebecca by my side, I returned to the now familiar sights of Los Angeles. Glancing at Rebecca walking beside me and the lingering goosebumps on my skin, I was reminded that the series of events in that village were not just a dream. By the time we arrived at my apartment, we were both exhausted. We ate breakfast together and took a nap in the warm, cozy bed. Afterwards, Rebecca pulled the IOU for the debt in question out of her pocket.
Actually, I've been carrying this on me at all times.
That's my sister for you, good thinking. With this, we have options. Especially here in Los Angeles. I took one more day off work and immediately looked up reputable law firms. That same day, Rebecca and I visited one IOU in hand. The lawyer had a serious expression as he explained several things to us. Afterwards, we stopped by the municipal office to consult about cutting ties with our parents. After Rebecca stayed with me in my apartment for about a week, we decided to visit our family home once more, to declare to our parents that we were severing our relationship. The moment we came face to face, Dad was already furious, while Mom sat next to him trembling, her face pale. Either he was already drunk or his face was flushed red with rage. As soon as he heard that we wanted to cut ties, he bellowed,
Don't screw with me.
He grabbed a nearby bottle and brandished it at Rebecca. I leapt forward just in time to stop him.
You too, Jessica. If you had just come home like a good girl, everything would have worked out.
He shouted, this time trying to hit me with the bottle.
Cut it out already.
Shielding Rebecca, I desperately dodged Dad's relentless attacks. Our defensive battle against Dad's rampage continued. But in a moment of vulnerability, the bottle Dad was swinging struck my shoulder hard.
Ow!
Crying out from the impact, I fell to the floor with a thud. But immediately after, I glared up at Dad and announced in a low voice,
Dad, this is all being recorded, you know.
Just as Dad let out a stupid sounding,
Huh?
I glanced back towards the living room entrance. From there, a man in a suit holding a camera quietly emerged. He was the lawyer in charge of our debt consultation, Mr. Young. Mr. Young calmly stated,
This is video evidence of domestic violence.
I had deliberately created an opening, letting Dad hit me, to capture concrete proof of his violence on camera. Dad sputtered,
You coward! Calling a lawyer, you city folk are always so damn sneaky.
Mom and the lawyer tried to calm Dad down and get him to take a seat, but he resisted, shouting all the while. But then the lawyer dispassionately declared,
As we have clear evidence of violence here, we will be calling the police now.
And with that, he smoothly proceeded to contact the police.
The police? Isn't that going too far?
Still clutching the bottle he had just hit me with, Dad was visibly shaken. Mom's face turned ashen. It was entirely possible that in this situation, Dad would fly off the handle at the slightest provocation and make any discussion impossible. Besides, even if he called the police on us, Rebecca and I were cutting ties anyway. We had nothing left to lose. Surprisingly, the police arrived with uncharacteristic speed for such a remote village. 2 sturdy male officers showed up, looking strong enough to easily subdue a drunk old man in his 60s like Dad. Seeing them, Dad clicked his tongue and deflated.
What, you're here to arrest me or something? That has not been decided yet. We will be discussing those matters and more with you now.
Flanked by the two policemen, the lawyer declared this clearly. Dad's demeanor took a complete 180 as he meekly sat down, looking uncharacteristically compliant. Young opened the IOU and explained that neither Rebecca nor I were listed as guarantors, so we had no obligation to repay our parents' debt.
Furthermore, you two confiscated all of Rebecca's money and used it to pay back the debt. And in order to serve Mr. Osborne's personal interests, you robbed Rebecca of her free will and tried to force her into marriage. Rebecca can sue you for attempting to file a marriage certificate without her consent. Sue? Who's gonna listen to some outsider from the city?
Dad tried to lash out again, but the police officers glared at him. He promptly fell silent once more.
In addition, we have the footage of the domestic violence incident from earlier. Moreover, Rebecca has several unnatural bruises on her body.
The lawyer spoke matter-of-factly, but I could hardly bear to hear this.
After speaking with her directly, it seems highly likely these bruises are the result of violence inflicted by Mr. Osborne. In this case, it is possible to either demand compensation or treat it as a criminal matter.
I hung my head, on the verge of tears. When I deliberately let myself get hit earlier, it hurt quite a bit. Rebecca had endured that pain over and over again. At the hands of Dad, who lost all self-control when he was drunk. How painful and difficult it must have been for her. I will never forgive Dad for everything he's done, nor Mom for failing to stop any of it.
What bruises? You got any proof?
Dad shouted. Mom started. Please, have mercy on us. Groveling in a deep apology. We're already in ruins just from the debt alone. It's not like I wanted to hand my daughter over to that man either. But we had no choice. And now you want to cut ties too? Compensation? That's impossible. Please, don't do this.
It's too late for that now, Mom. You never even tried to protect Rebecca until things got this bad.
You're one to talk, running away from home. That's right, you're working in Los Angeles now, aren't you, Jessica? I bet you're making good money. If you paid off Raymond's debts for us, couldn't we just sweep this all under the rug? Mom looked up at me in tears, fawning. Rage exploded in my head. It wasn't just Dad in the end. This woman was also someone who only saw her own children as money or property.
Enough already! Like hell I'm paying! What do you two think your kids are? Rebecca and I are human beings. We're not money printing machines or things you can just do whatever you want with.
I shouted at my parents. I wanted so badly to hit them, but I restrained myself somehow, knowing that if I resorted to violence, the story would change.
Both Rebecca and I want to live our lives freely. We're cutting ties with this household. From now on, Rebecca will be living in Los Angeles too. We won't be contacting you at all.
Leaving those words behind, I grabbed Rebecca's hand and briskly walked out of the house. The lawyer followed close behind us. The police officers said,
"We've heard what you have to say. We'll hand off the rest of this matter to our colleagues in Los Angeles,"
and then left. We decided to handle any future discussions of compensation or lawsuits through our lawyer. Afterwards, I took care of various procedures while Rebecca lived together with me in my apartment. Then a few months later, as a result of the trial, our parents were slapped with a restraining order preventing them from contacting Rebecca or myself. They were also obligated to pay back the money they had taken from Rebecca. And we were able to demand compensation from Kingston, the creditor who had tried to force Rebecca to marry his grandson. The IOU was passed on to Kingston's son. The fact remained that Dad had borrowed a massive sum, so our parents would have to work at the factory run by Kingston's son to pay back the debt. As a rural factory, the wages were nothing to write home about. Who knows how long it would take them to pay everything back. Furthermore, after consultations with the lawyer and experts, Dad was diagnosed with alcohol dependence. Treatment would require money for hospital visits and counseling. On top of the debt repayment, those expenses ensured they would have zero financial leeway for luxuries like alcohol. If anything, it was questionable whether they could even maintain a normal standard of living. While our parents were left to face the consequences of their actions, Rebecca and I, having successfully cut ties with them, lived together happily and peacefully. Through my acquaintances and friends, I introduced Rebecca to a job. With her diligence and good manners, she quickly won over her employers and secured the position. More time passed, and then,
Rebecca, is that true?
she had some surprising news for me. Apparently, one of her coworkers had asked her out, and they had started dating. I was overjoyed for Rebecca's newfound love and cooked a special dinner that night.
Jessica, you're way too excited about this. It's kind of embarrassing.
I can't help but be thrilled. Not only did we finally free you from being trapped in that house, but now you've found a boyfriend of your own free will. I'm so happy I could cry. Tearing up with joy, I clasped Rebecca's hands.
Jessica, thank you, truly. It's because I had you that I can walk my own path in life now.
No, that's not true. It's all thanks to how hard you worked, Rebecca. Jessica and I had both found partners in our line of work, and we were making plans for a double date in the near future. The Rebecca I saw now was a far cry from the grief-stricken, desperate woman from that nightmarish evening. She exuded vitality and healthfulness, radiating an aura of happiness as both a person and a woman. We were determined to continue doing the work we loved, using the money we earned to enrich our own lives. We would date partners of our own choosing, with hopes of eventually getting married. As we each sought fulfillment in our individual lives, I knew our friendship would endure, the bond between us unbreakable.